The alert came without warning. No countdown, no diplomatic signal, no formal request to enter sovereign galactic space. One moment the transit corridor above Concordia Station was empty, carrying nothing but the usual scatter of trade vessels and diplomatic shuttles moving between the 41 member species of the Galactic Council. The next moment, something was there. Something so large that the station's proximity sensors screamed, and every ship in the corridor broke formation out of pure instinct. I was standing at the observation window on the upper tier of the diplomatic wing when it happened. My name is Keth Oron, and I have spent 312 years in service to the Galactic Council. I have attended the births of new civilizations. I have stood in rooms where wars ended with a handshake. I have lived long enough to believe that I had seen every shape surprise could take. I had not seen this. The ship that dropped out of hyperspace above Concordia Station was not like anything in our records. It was enormous, yes, longer than most Council warships, built along lines that were angular and dense and deliberate, like something designed not to be beautiful but to survive. Its hull was dark, a deep gray that absorbed light rather than reflecting it, and across its surface were marks that I would later understand were the scars of years of combat. Repaired sections where the metal was slightly different in color, patches where weapons ports had been rebuilt, long pale lines where energy fire had carved the hull and been welded shut again. This ship had been in fights, many of them, and it had come out of every one still flying. Across its forward section, in letters large enough to read from the observation window, were words I did not recognize. Our translation systems processed them in seconds. The ship's name was the Ezen's Unyielding Memory. Below the name was a smaller line of text, Earth Sovereignty Navy, First Contact Division. Every person on that observation deck went completely still. Earth. I knew the name. Every senior council diplomat knew the name, though we were not supposed to discuss it in open session. Earth was listed in our internal classification files as a Category 3 developing world, a planet with sentient life that had been assessed as pre-contact, meaning they had not yet achieved the technological threshold that would make them eligible for formal introduction to the galactic community. The file on Earth was thin, a few observation reports, a note about the development of their early space travel programs, a recommendation from about 80 years ago that the species be monitored but not approached, since they showed, and I remember the exact wording because I had read the file twice, signs of aggressive social instability and unpredictable resource acquisition behavior. The file had said nothing about warships. The file had said nothing about a fleet that could navigate hyperspace. The file had said nothing about a vessel that looked like it had been built specifically for sustained long-range combat operations. The station's emergency channel opened, and the voice of Station Commander Velka came through. Calm, professional, exactly the kind of voice you want to hear when something has gone very wrong. All diplomatic personnel are asked to move away from external observation windows and proceed to their assigned gathering areas. We are in contact with the approaching vessel. Please remain calm. Nobody moved. We all kept staring. The unyielding memory had not fired its weapons. It had not accelerated toward the station. It simply held its position, massive and dark and patient, its weapon ports open. And that detail was the one that made my stomach drop, because in 40 years of active council service, I had never seen a ship hold its weapon ports open at a diplomatic station without it being the opening move of an act of aggression. Open ports meant readiness. Open ports meant, I am prepared to use these at a moment's notice, and I want you to know it. And then the transmission came through. It came through on the General Council frequency, the public diplomatic band that every species monitored, the one that could not be quietly suppressed or rerouted to a private channel. It was a voice, a human voice, calm and measured, and completely without the kind of deference that species typically used when addressing the Council for the first time. This is Commander Yael Doss, of the Earth Sovereignty Navy, commanding officer of the SN's Unyielding Memory. We are transmitting on the Council's primary diplomatic frequency because we want every member species to hear what we are about to say. We are not here to negotiate. We are not here to request membership. We are here because members of this council have committed crimes against the people of Earth for a period of no less than 340 years, and those crimes have never been acknowledged, never been punished, and never been stopped. That changes today. We will be sending a formal list of demands within the next 2 hours. Until those demands are reviewed and responded to, this vessel will remain at its current position. We will not fire first. We will not board your station. But we will not leave. I want to be very clear about that last part. We will not leave. The transmission ended. The observation deck was silent for a long moment. Then everyone started talking at once. I did not join in. I walked away from the window and down the corridor toward the private offices that the council allocated to senior diplomats during the Concordia sessions, and I sat down at my desk, and I looked at the wall, and I thought about two things. The first thing I thought about was the word 340 years. Earth had been classified as pre-contact, approximately 80 years ago, which meant that even by the council's own internal records, the planet had not been on our radar for more than 8 decades. But the human commander had said 340 years. She had said it without hesitation. She had said it the way you say a number you have been carrying with you for a very long time, a number so familiar and so heavy that it has become part of how you breathe. The second thing I thought about was the fact that this ship, this enormous, scarred, clearly battle-experienced vessel, had been built, crewed, equipped, and navigated across hyperspace by a species that our files described as pre-contact and technologically primitive. Someone was wrong, and I already suspected it was not the human commander. I pulled up the Council Archive access terminal on my desk and entered my senior diplomat credentials. I opened the file on Earth. It was exactly as thin as I remembered. A handful of documents, the observation reports, the classification notice, the monitoring recommendation. Nothing that explained how a species went from early space travel to a hyperspace-capable warship in 80 years. Nothing that explained 340 years of alleged crimes. Nothing that felt, in any way, like the complete truth. I flagged the file for cross-reference and began searching the broader archive for any connected documents, any references to Earth in other files, any mention of the planet or its people in reports from other species or other departments. What I found surprised me, which is to say, I found almost nothing, and the absence of information, in an archive as vast as the Council's, was itself a kind of information. You do not spend 3 centuries in diplomacy without learning that the things people choose not to record are often more important than the things they do. I set the search running on a deeper filter and went back to the observation window. The unyielding memory had not moved. In the corridor outside, I could hear the sounds of the council going into crisis mode, the hurried footsteps of aides, the raised voices of senior representatives, the specific kind of organized panic that comes when something happens that does not fit into any existing protocol. There were 41 member species on the council. Each of them had different priorities, different fears, and different relationships with the concept of an unannounced alien warship appearing above a diplomatic station. Some species would be calling for immediate military response. Some would be reaching out to their home fleets. Some would be doing exactly what I was doing, looking for information, trying to understand what was actually happening before deciding what to do about it. I returned to my desk. The cross-reference search had returned one result. It was a document from 60 years ago, filed in the infrastructure department under a routine heading about station maintenance. It was a very boring-looking document. I would never have found it if I had not been specifically looking for Earth references, because the word Earth appeared only once, in a footnote, described as the origin point of recovered non-registered biological material transported through hegemony transit channels. The document itself was about updating cargo inspection protocols at 3 border stations. I read that sentence 3 times. Non-registered biological material. That was a phrase that the council used when it did not want to use plain words. I had seen it before, in other contexts, in other files. It meant people. It meant people who were being moved somewhere they had not agreed to go, through channels they were not supposed to be visible in numbers large enough to require an update to cargo inspection protocols. I sat very still at my desk. From the corridor came the sound of a raised voice I recognized, Councillor Draven, of the Tharic hegemony, the most powerful individual in the current council session, a diplomat of remarkable skill and absolutely no warmth. He was speaking quickly and quietly to someone, too quietly for me to make out the words, but I could hear the edge in his voice. Draven was not a person who alarmed easily. The fact that he sounded alarmed was, in its own way, more frightening than the ship outside. I closed the document and opened a new search. this time looking specifically at Therac hegemony transit records from the period between 100 and 400 years ago. The search required higher clearance than my standard credentials allowed. I requested an emergency override, citing active diplomatic crisis, and waited. While I waited, I looked out the window again. The unyielding memory was still there, and I found myself doing something I rarely do. I found myself actually looking at it, not as a threat or a problem to be solved, but as a thing in itself. A ship that large did not get built in a year, or 5 years, or even 20 years. That kind of construction required resources, planning, technical knowledge, time, and the kind of sustained institutional commitment that comes from a species that has decided, collectively, to build something this serious. A ship that scarred had been in real combat, repeated and prolonged, against enemies capable of doing serious damage to a vessel of this size. And a ship that was here, at Concordia Station, had navigated successfully through hyperspace, which required mathematics and engineering of a level that our own files said Earth should not have achieved for at least another century. None of it added up, unless something had happened to Earth that our files did not record, unless something had been done to them, and the doing of it had changed them, accelerated them, pushed them in directions that a species left alone and developing naturally would never have needed to go. The override clearance came through. I opened the Therac transit records. I started reading. An hour later, my assistant, a young council aide named Owen Bright, knocked on my door and told me that the emergency session was beginning in 20 minutes and that my presence was required. I told him I would be there. He looked at my face and asked if I was all right. I told him I had read something that had changed how I understood several things, and that I needed a few minutes to think before I went into a room full of people. He nodded and left me alone. I looked at the transit records still open on my screen. I thought about the phrase, non-registered biological material. I thought about the gap between what the Council's files said about Earth and what that ship outside the window clearly demonstrated about Earth. I thought about 340 years. Commander Doss had not said that number to threaten us. She had said it the way you say a number when you want the people in the room to understand that this is not new. This is not a sudden crisis or an unexpected development or a misunderstanding that got out of hand. This is the ending of something very old. And the people responsible for that old thing had been sitting in council chambers for a very long time, participating in sessions about justice and interspecies cooperation and the common good, while a species on the other side of the galaxy had been suffering for longer than most of the people in those chambers had been alive. I closed the files and straightened my diplomatic sash and went to the emergency session. The chamber was full. Every representative, every senior aide, every security chief, the kind of crowd that only assembles when something has happened, that everyone knows they will be remembering for the rest of their lives. Counselor Draven was already speaking. He was doing what he always did in a crisis, controlling the frame of the conversation before anyone else could establish a different one. He was talking about the unauthorized entry into council space. He was talking about protocol violations. He was talking about the precedent that would be set if the council allowed a non-member species to appear above a diplomatic installation, with weapons active, and make demands on an open frequency. He was talking about everything except what Commander Doss had actually said. I took my seat and looked at the faces around me. Some of them were frightened. Some of them were calculating. Some of them were doing exactly what Draven was doing, focusing on process and procedure, because process and procedure were safer than the alternative, which was engaging with the actual content of the human transmission. 340 years. I looked at the high window at the far end of the chamber, through which, if you were sitting at the right angle, you could just see the edge of the unyielding memory, still holding its position above the station. I thought about what I had found in the transit records. I thought about what I had not yet found but was already certain was there. And I thought about the fact that in this room, right now, the people with the most to hide were also the people with the most power, and that the next few hours were going to decide whether the truth had any chance at all of surviving the meeting. Owen passed me a note. It said, "More human ships detected at the outer marker. 12 additional vessels, all holding position, all weapons active." I folded the note and put it in my pocket and looked at Counselor Draven, who was still talking, his voice smooth and confident and completely controlled, and I thought, He already knows. He already knows, and he is afraid. And everything he says from this point forward is going to be designed to make sure that fear never shows. I opened my mouth, and for the first time in the emergency session I spoke. "Counselor Draven," I said, keeping my voice very calm. "Before we discuss protocol, I think we should discuss what the commander of that ship actually said." The room shifted. Draven looked at me with an expression I had learned to read over many years. Not anger, not quite. Something colder than anger. A reassessment. "The transmission was noted," he said. "The transmission made a specific claim," I said. 340 years of crimes committed by council members against the people of Earth. "I have been looking at the archive for the last hour. I think we need to talk about what the archive actually contains." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that has weight. Outside the window, the unyielding memory waited. And somewhere on that ship, I knew, Commander Yael Das was waiting too, patient, prepared, carrying a number she had been carrying her whole life, 340 years. I was going to make sure this room heard it. The document that changed everything was not dramatic. It was 3 pages long. It was filed under a budget heading. It had been sitting in the archive for 60 years, untouched, in a section that nobody ever had any reason to search, unless they were specifically looking for evidence of something that, according to the official record, did not exist. I had the document open on my terminal when Owen came in the next morning, with a cup of something warm and a look on his face that told me he had spent the night doing his own reading. "I found more," he said, sitting down across from me without being asked. "So did I said. "How far back does yours go?" 280 years, he said. "Yours?" "Further," I said. "Much further." Owen Bright was 43 years old, a junior aide from a small species called the Velith, and he was, in my long experience, the most genuinely honest person working in the Council's diplomatic corps. He had not been at the emergency session the night before. His clearance did not extend to full council chambers, but he had heard enough from the general staff to understand that something serious was happening, and he had done what honest people do when something serious is happening. He had started looking for facts. He put a data chip on my desk. "The cargo inspection records," he said. "Not just the one you found. I cross-referenced the maintenance documents with the logistics files from 14 border stations over the last 3 centuries. The pattern is consistent." I looked at the chip. "Has anyone else seen these?" "Not unless they've been looking as carefully as we have," he said. "They're not hidden, exactly. They're just filed in places where nobody would think to look, unless they already knew what they were looking for." That was the thing about the Council's archive. It was vast. 3,000 years of records from 41 species, covering every administrative, diplomatic, scientific, and military action that had ever been formally logged. Hiding something in an archive that large was not difficult. You did not need to destroy the evidence. You simply needed to file it in the wrong place, under the wrong heading, with the wrong cross-references, and it would sit there for as long as you needed it to, invisible to everyone who was not specifically hunting for it. Someone had been very good at this. Someone had been doing it for a very long time. I picked up the data chip. "We need to talk about what to do with this," I said. "We need to talk about it carefully," Owen said. "Counselor Draven's security team has already requested access logs for the senior archive terminals. They'll know you were searching last night." "They'll know what I searched for," I said. "They won't know what I found." "Not yet." I nodded. He was right to be concerned. In 3 centuries of council service, I had learned that information is not simply a tool, it is a target. The moment you hold information that powerful people do not want you to have, you become a target too. I had navigated situations like this before, though never quite this large, never with quite this many implications. I thought about Commander Das, holding her position above the station with 13 ships and open weapon ports, and the kind of patience that suggested she had been preparing for this moment for a very long time. "I'm going to request a direct meeting with the human commander," I said. Owen stared at me. "The council hasn't authorized contact with the human vessel." "No," I said, "they haven't. Draven will consider that a violation of the session protocols." "Draven," I said, "has considerably larger problems than my protocol violations, though he doesn't want anyone to realize that yet." Owen was quiet for a moment. "What did you find?" he asked. "In the deeper files. The ones that go further back than mine." I looked at him. Owen Bright, who had come in early with a data chip and honest eyes, and the kind of quiet courage that does not announce itself. I had worked with him for 6 years. I had never regretted trusting him. 340 years ago, I said, a Theric hegemony exploration vessel made first contact with Earth. Not the first contact that was officially recorded 80 years ago. Real first contact, 3.5 centuries ago, when the people of Earth were early in their development of space travel, before they had gone far beyond their own solar system, before they had any idea that the galaxy was as populated as it is. Owen said nothing. He was listening with his whole body, the way people listen when they already suspect the story is going to be worse than they feared. The hegemony vessel reported back to its home command that Earth was a Class 4 developing world, with a large, adaptable, resilient population, and a high capacity for learning complex technical skills quickly. The report recommended that the planet be classified as a resource opportunity. I paused. Not a civilization, a resource. Owen closed his eyes briefly. And then, over the following 3 centuries, a systematic operation was established. Not openly, not officially, nothing that would ever appear in council records under anything resembling its real name. Human beings were taken from Earth, and from early human colonial settlements that were established over the following decades. They were taken quietly, in ways designed not to create evidence or witnesses. They were transported through Theric hegemony transit channels, documented under classification codes that described them as unregistered biological material. They were put to work in locations the Council has never officially acknowledged. The room was very quiet. "And the rest of the Council?" Owen asked. "Some knew. Some benefited, indirectly, through trade relationships with the hegemony that were built on infrastructure and production lines that the public record does not fully explain. Some, I believe, genuinely did not know, or knew enough to suspect and made the choice not to ask questions, which is its own kind of knowing." Owen opened his eyes. "And the classification of Earth as pre-contact, 80 years ago, was a formal mechanism," I said, "to give the operation a bureaucratic cover. If Earth is officially pre-contact, then there are no obligations, no protections, no reporting requirements. Whatever happens to the people of Earth, and wherever they go, it is outside Council jurisdiction, because Council jurisdiction only applies to species that have been formally contacted and registered." I let that sit for a moment. Except that the hegemony had already been in contact with Earth for 260 years by that point. The pre-contact classification was not a description of the situation. It was a lie, designed to sustain a legal fiction. Owen was quiet for a long time. Outside my office window, in the middle distance, the dark shape of the unyielding memory was visible, patient and still, its scarred hull catching the light of the system's star. "So when Commander Doss said 340 years, Owen said slowly. "She was counting from the real first contact," I said. "From the moment the hegemony vessel entered Earth's system, and the people of Earth first became visible to a species that decided they were useful. She was not counting the time the Council was officially aware of Earth's existence. She was counting the time her people had been dealing with the consequences of that first, secret contact." Owen stood up. He walked to the window and looked at the ship. "How did they find out?" "I don't know yet," I said, "but I think Commander Doss can tell us." "You're really going to request a direct meeting?" "I am." He turned from the window. "Then I'm coming with you." I looked at him. "Owen, you're going to need a witness," he said simply. "You're going to need someone who has also seen the files and can speak to their authenticity. And you're going to need someone who isn't the only person in the room keeping a record of what's said." He picked up his data chip from my desk and held it up. "I have copies of everything, stored somewhere that isn't on any Council server." I thought about what Draven would say. I thought about the look in his eyes when I had spoken at the emergency session. That cold reassessment, that recalculation. I thought about 3 centuries of watching powerful people protect themselves at the expense of everyone else. "All right," I said. "Let's go." The request for direct contact with the unyielding memory went through the station's communications office, which meant it was logged and visible to anyone with access to the communications manifest. I did not try to hide it. Hiding it would have implied I thought I was doing something wrong. I did not think I was doing something wrong. I thought I was doing the only sensible thing available in a situation where the sensible options were shrinking rapidly. The response came back in less than 4 minutes. Commander Doss accepted the meeting. She nominated the station's neutral docking bay, Level 7, as the location, a bay that neither the Council nor the human ship controlled exclusively, accessed from both sides through airlocks that both parties could monitor. She specified she would come alone and unarmed. She asked that we do the same. Owen and I walked to Level 7 through corridors that were quieter than usual, the normal flow of station life having been disrupted by the emergency. Diplomatic staff moving in clusters, security personnel stationed at intervals that were slightly closer together than usual. 2 of Draven's personal aides passed us going the other way. One of them looked at me with an expression I recognized. Not hostility exactly, but the specific look of someone who has been told to observe and report. I nodded to him pleasantly and kept walking. The neutral docking bay smelled like metal and recycled air, and the faint trace of propellant that always lingers in spaces where ships dock and depart. It was a large, clean, well-lit space, and it was empty, except for the 2 of us when we arrived. The airlock on the far side was sealed. We waited. 3 minutes later, the airlock opened. Commander Yael Doss stepped through. She was not what I expected, though I could not have said precisely what I had expected. She was of average height for a human, with dark hair cut short and close to her head, and she was wearing a uniform that was plain and dark and free of decoration, except for a row of small pins on the left side of her chest. I counted 27 of them, and a single patch on her shoulder, bearing the emblem of the Earth Sovereignty Navy. She was carrying nothing in her hands. She walked with the particular kind of ease that comes not from the absence of tension, but from very long practice at holding tension inside your body in a way that doesn't show on the surface. She looked at me, and she looked at Owen. She looked around the bay with the quick, systematic scan of someone who has spent a long time in situations where knowing your exits matters. Then she looked back at me. "Kethoron," she said. It was not a question. "Commander Doss," I said. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." "You were the only one who asked," she said. "In the whole council, you were the only one. That tells me something about you." She paused. "It also tells me something about everyone else." She walked to the center of the bay and stopped, and I found myself thinking again about that word, patient. She had the patience of someone who has been waiting for a very long time and has learned that patience is not the absence of urgency, but the discipline of channeling urgency in a useful direction. "I've been reading the archive," I said. "I know," she said. "We've been monitoring your terminal activity since you logged on last night. You went in the right direction very quickly." I absorbed that. "You have access to Council archive monitoring?" "We've had access to a great many things for quite a while," she said. "That's part of what I want you to understand. We did not arrive here unprepared. We did not arrive here on impulse. Everything about the way we have approached this moment has been designed to give the Council one clear choice: face the truth honestly, or face it the hard way. We would prefer the first option." A brief pause. "We are prepared for the second." Owen said quietly, from beside me, "How long have you been preparing for this?" Doss looked at him. "My whole life," she said. "My parents' whole lives, and their parents before them." She looked between us. "How much did you find in the archive?" "Enough to understand the shape of it," I said. "Not all of it." "Then let me tell you the rest," she said. "Because there are things in the archive you will not find easily, and there are things that were never in the archive at all. Things that only exist in our records, things that the people who did this to us were careful never to write down." She looked at me steadily, and I saw in her eyes what I had not expected to see. Not anger, though the anger was surely there, somewhere underneath. What I saw was something closer to a kind of weary clarity, the look of someone who has known a difficult thing for a very long time, and has made peace, not with the thing itself, but with the fact of carrying it. "This is going to take a while," she said. "I hope you cleared your schedule." I looked at her, this human commander with her 27 pins and her patient eyes, and her ship full of people who had every reason in the galaxy to be something other than calm. "I have cleared everything," I said. She nodded, and she began. She did not start at the beginning. She started in the middle, the way people do when the beginning has been known to them for so long, that they no longer bother with it. When the origin of a thing has been absorbed so deeply into who you are that explaining it feels like explaining why you breathe. My grandmother's name was Isla Doss, she said. She was born on a human colony world called Harrow's Point, about 60 light-years from Earth. She was 15 years old when a Theric vessel came to the colony and offered the Settlement Council a trade agreement. Infrastructure equipment in exchange for labor contracts. Standard terms, or so they said. 43 of the colonists signed up. Isla watched them leave. Doss paused. None of them ever came back. The neutral docking bay was very quiet. Owen and I stood still. Doss did not sit. She stood in the center of the space with her hands clasped in front of her, her posture perfectly straight, her voice steady in the way that a voice gets steady when the person speaking has told a particular story many times and has long since stopped needing to work to keep their composure while telling it. Harrow's Point was a small colony, she said. About 400 people. When the 43 workers didn't come back, the colony council sent a complaint through the nearest council relay station. The complaint was logged. A council administrative office sent back a form letter explaining that labor contract disputes fell under Theric hegemony internal jurisdiction and that the council could not intervene in the private commercial arrangements of its member species. She looked at me. You know that letter, don't you? It was a standard response, I said, and I was ashamed to say it. It was a door closing, she said. Harrow's Point sent more complaints. 3 over the following 2 years. Each one got the same form letter, slightly differently worded. The Colony Council eventually sent a representative to the nearest council diplomatic station in person. The representative was told that the matter had been reviewed and no action could be taken. Her jaw tightened slightly. The representative was also told, very politely, that Harrow's Point was a pre-contact settlement, meaning it had not yet met the formal registration requirements for a human colonial outpost, and therefore the colonists did not have standing as protected persons under council law. Owen made a sound that was not quite a word. Pre-contact, I said, used as a legal blocking mechanism. The hegemony was very good at paperwork, Doss said. The pre-contact classification is a council procedure that was designed to protect developing species from being overwhelmed by galactic contact before they were ready for it. It was a protective tool. The hegemony worked out, apparently quite early on, that a protective tool could be used as a cage if you applied it the right way. She unclasped her hands and let them hang at her sides. Every human settlement that tried to access council legal protections was reclassified as pre-contact, as part of a coordinated administrative operation run out of the hegemony's diplomatic bureau. We found the records when we captured one of their regional command stations about 20 years ago. I looked at her sharply. You captured a hegemony command station. We've been at war with the hegemony for 40 years, she said, as if this were a straightforward fact, which for her, I supposed it was. An unofficial war, conducted in space sectors that the Council doesn't actively monitor, using methods that don't appear on any official register. They've been hiding what they do to us. We've been hiding what we do in response. The difference is that what they hide is a crime, and what we hide has been a survival strategy. I sat down on one of the cargo crates at the edge of the bay. I had not intended to sit down, but my legs decided for me. 40 years, I said, and the Council had no knowledge of this. Some did, she said. We've identified at least 6 Council intelligence agencies that had fragmentary information about the conflict and chose not to report it to the full body. Whether that was because they were complicit, or because they were afraid of the hegemony, or because they simply didn't care enough about a pre-contact species to consider it their problem, I can't say with certainty. But the information existed. It was seen. It was buried. Owen was writing notes on his personal terminal. He had been writing since Doss began speaking. Commander, he said without looking up, when you say you've been at war, what does that look like, in practical terms? Doss considered the question seriously, which I had already noticed was her habit. She did not give quick answers, even to questions that might have seemed simple. In practical terms, she said, it has looked like this. We locate a facility that we believe is holding human workers under involuntary contract. We gather intelligence on the facility. We plan a recovery operation. We go in. We recover everyone we can, and we get out. We do not announce these operations in advance. We do not file reports with the Council. We do not ask permission. A pause. Permission is not something that has historically been useful to us. How many operations? Owen asked. Over 40 years? Hundreds of small ones. 17 major ones. She said it without pride or dramatic emphasis. She said it the way you say a number, when that number represents years of your life, and the lives of people you know. 17 major recovery operations. We recovered approximately 84,000 people across those 17 operations. The number landed in the room like something physical. 84,000. 84,000 human beings, pulled out of facilities that should never have existed, transported through channels that no one was officially monitoring, held under conditions that the archive was very carefully structured to make invisible. And those were only the ones who had been recovered. Those were only the ones still alive to be found. I thought about the 6 lost colonies mentioned in the human transmission. I thought about 11 missing settlements, 11 places where human beings had built communities and lives and futures, and where something had happened that the hegemony had apparently been thorough enough about that even the humans, with 40 years of intelligence work, had not been able to locate them. The 11 missing settlements, I said. Doss's expression did not change, but something in her eyes did. A tightening, a pulling inward, the way a wound responds when something touches it. Yes, she said. What happened to them? We don't know, she said. That's the honest answer. We know they existed. We know they were functioning communities with hundreds of people each. We know that at some point between 100 and 150 years ago, all 11 went dark within a short period of time. No transmissions. No survivors who found their way into the channels we monitor. No records in anything we've captured from hegemony stations. She paused. The hegemony's records in general are thorough. They kept meticulous documentation of everything they moved and transported and deployed. The absence of records for those 11 settlements is notable. They were either destroyed so completely that there was nothing to record, or someone made a specific effort to ensure those records did not survive. The docking bay felt very cold, though the temperature had not changed. One of my conditions, Doss continued, is that the Council turn over any and all Theric hegemony internal records to which it has access, through diplomatic exchange treaties. Every document, every archive, every backup of every database that the hegemony has shared with the Council, under any information sharing agreement, over the last 4 centuries. We want to look through all of it. She looked at me directly. You understand why. You're hoping the 11 settlements are in there somewhere, I said. We're hoping, she said. We've been hoping for a long time. At this point, we may not find survivors. We know that, but we want to know what happened. The families of those people, the descendants, the communities on Earth, and on the other colony worlds, who have been waiting for answers for a century. They deserve to know. I stood up from the cargo crate. My legs felt steadier now, though my mind was full to the edges with everything she had said. Commander, I want to be direct with you about something. Please, she said. The Council is not a unified body in the way that outside observers often assume. There are 41 member species, and they have 41 different sets of priorities, and 41 different relationships with the Theric hegemony. Some of those relationships are very close. Some are financially entangled in ways that go back generations. When your transmission reached this station yesterday, you created a crisis that the people most responsible for the situation you've described are now in a position to manage. Because they are the ones with the most experience managing crises, and the most resources for doing so, and the most motivation to ensure that the resolution of this crisis serves their interests rather than yours. Doss looked at me with an expression that was not quite a smile, but was something adjacent to it. I know, she said. We spent a long time thinking about that problem. And we decided that the only way to address it was to make the truth so visible, so quickly, that managing it in private became impossible. She looked toward the ceiling, in the direction of where her ship was, though it was not visible from here. The transmission went on the General Council frequency. Every species in the Council received it simultaneously. Every diplomatic team, every intelligence agency, every news service that monitors Council channels. By the time Councillor Draven decided how he wanted to respond to what we said, there were already several thousand species who had heard the original transmission and were forming their own understanding of it. She looked back at me. He can control the Council session. He cannot control what every listener in the galaxy does with the information we gave them. Owen looked up from his notes. You're not just making your case to the Council. No, she said. We are making our case to everyone. The Council acts as if it is the whole galaxy, but it is not the whole galaxy. There are species outside the Council, species on its periphery, who have been waiting for decades for a reason to push back against hegemony dominance in this region. There are Council member species who have private grievances they have never felt safe voicing. There are journalists and historians and independent monitors who have been asking questions about hegemony transit records for years, and been told there was nothing to find. She paused. We are giving all of them something to work with. I looked at her. You're going to make it impossible for the Council to bury this. We're going to make it so expensive to try that. Even the people who want to try will have to think very carefully about whether it's worth it, she said. It's not the same thing. It's not perfect. But it's what we have. Owen had stopped writing. He was looking at Doss with the expression he gets when he is thinking something he hasn't decided whether to say yet. I have worked with him long enough to know that when he gets that expression, what he is about to say is usually important. Commander, he said, the hegemony has a fleet. Yes, she said. A large one. One of the 3 largest in Council space. Yes. And if the Council moves against them, or if the hegemony decides that the cost of exposure is higher than the cost of conflict, then we are not talking about legal proceedings and archive access and recovery operations. We are talking about something much larger. Yes, she said again. Her voice did not change. Her posture did not change. She simply held his eyes and repeated the word with the same quiet weight. Are you prepared for that? Owen asked. Doss was quiet for a moment. Not the hesitation of someone who has not thought about the question, but the stillness of someone who has thought about it so many times that they have reached a place on the other side of the thinking, where the answer is settled, and the only question is how to say it. We have been in conflict with the hegemony for 40 years, she said. Low level, unacknowledged, conducted in the dark. We are still here. They are still looking over their shoulders. The hegemony is powerful, but they have always been fighting an enemy they could not officially acknowledge, which means they could not prepare for us the way they would prepare for a declared adversary. They have been reactive. We have been strategic. She looked at Owen calmly. We did not come here to start a war. We came here to end one. But if the hegemony chooses to make the resolution of this matter a military question rather than a legal one, yes, we are prepared for that. She said it without drama. Without the kind of energy that people put into statements when they want the statement itself to create an impression. She said it the way you state a fact about weather or distance, something that simply is and does not need embellishment. I believed her completely. And in believing her, I felt something shift in my understanding of the situation. A reorientation, like a map turning to show you north when you had been orienting to south. The Council had been treating the arrival of the unyielding memory as an intrusion, an incident, a problem to be managed. Draven and the people around him were working within that frame, trying to position the situation as one where the humans were the disruptive element, and the Council's role was to restore order. But Doss was not an intrusion. Doss was a consequence. Everything she represented, the ship, the fleet waiting at the outer marker, the 40 years of quiet conflict, the archive of evidence that she had spent decades accumulating, was the direct and logical result of something that members of this council had done, and sustained, and hidden, for 3.5 centuries. The hegemony had made a species into a resource, and that species had spent 3.5 centuries, quietly, patiently, systematically becoming something that the hegemony had never accounted for. Commander, I said, I have access to the archive. I have clearance that goes deep enough to find things that most council members cannot see. I want to give you everything I find. Doss looked at me steadily. Why? Because, I said, in 300 years of diplomatic service, I have told myself a great many things about the council, and what it represents, and the good it does. Some of those things are true. Some of them, I am beginning to understand, were things I told myself in order to avoid looking at the things that are not true. I met her gaze, and I am very tired of that. She studied me for a long moment. Then she nodded. A single, clean nod. Nothing performative about it. All right, Kethoran, she said. Let's get to work. Owen's terminal chimed. He looked at it. His face did something complicated. The counselor's office has requested your location, he said to me. 3 times in the last hour. The most recent message says it is urgent. It will become more urgent, I said. Let them wait. Doss glanced at Owen's terminal without being invited to. The Tharic delegation is already moving, she said. We're picking up a significant increase in encrypted signal traffic from their section of the station. They've been communicating with the Hegemony home fleet since your transmission last night. We've been monitoring the channel, though we cannot decrypt all of it. What can you decrypt? I asked. Enough to know that they are not simply waiting to see how the council responds, she said. They are making preparations. She looked at me. The 96 hours I mentioned in our initial demands. That is not an arbitrary number. That is the outer limit of our assessment of how long the hegemony will hold, before deciding that action is preferable to exposure. 96 hours. 4 days. 4 days in which everything that happened next would determine whether a 340-year wrong was going to be acknowledged and answered, or whether the people responsible for it would find a way to bury it again, this time under something larger and more final than paperwork. I need to get back to the archive, I said. And I need to get back to my ship, Doss said. She moved toward the airlock, then stopped and turned. Kethoran, what you're doing, what you have already done by coming here, by opening the archive, by sitting in that emergency session and asking the council to hear what I actually said, these are not small things. I want you to understand that we know they are not small things. She did not say thank you. I had the sense that she considered it inadequate. What she was offering instead was something more serious. An acknowledgement, a seeing, the kind of recognition that passes between people who understand that some situations do not have easy exits, and that choosing the harder path has a cost. I understand, I said. She went through the airlock. It sealed behind her with a soft, final sound. Owen and I were alone in the bay. He closed his terminal and held it against his chest and was quiet for a long moment. The hegemony has known for 40 years that this was coming, he said finally. Yes, I said. And they have spent 40 years doing nothing to stop it. They spent 40 years assuming that nothing could stop them, I said. That is a very different thing. Owen looked at the sealed airlock. I would like to believe this ends well, he said. So would I said. Let's find everything we can to make that more likely. We left the bay and went back toward the archive, and behind us, through the station's hull, the unyielding memory continued to hold its position, patient and dark, and bearing the marks of every fight it had survived. A ship built by a species that had learned, the hard way, and over a very long time, that the universe does not reward waiting for someone else to correct the record. The deeper archive was not a comfortable place to work. It occupied a section of the station's lower levels that most council staff never visited, a series of small rooms lined with terminals, lit by the kind of flat, even light, that is designed to reduce eye strain over long periods, and succeeds mainly in making everyone look slightly unwell. The air was cooler than the rest of the station, and smelled faintly of the cooling systems that kept the archive servers running. There was one other person in the room when Owen and I arrived, an archivist named Ben Caro, who was young and thin, and wore the expression of someone who spends a great deal of time with documents, and is generally more comfortable with documents than with people. He looked up when we came in. He looked at me. He looked at Owen. He looked back at his terminal. You were here last night, he said to me. It was not an accusation. It was an observation. I was, I said. You went very deep, he said. I noticed the access patterns this morning. You know how to navigate an archive like this one. Most people don't. He paused. Counselor Draven's office sent a priority request this morning, asking for a log of all searches conducted on the senior archive terminals in the last 48 hours. I looked at him. Did you provide it? Ben Caro looked at his terminal for a moment. Then he looked back at me. The log export system appears to be experiencing a minor technical fault, he said. I have submitted a maintenance request. These things can take some time to resolve. He looked back at his terminal and began typing. I looked at Owen, who was looking at Ben Caro with an expression of quiet respect. Thank you, I said to the archivist. I have been working in this archive for 31 years, Ben Caro said without turning around. In 31 years, I have filed a great many documents. Some of them were documents that it made me uncomfortable to file, because of where they came from and what they described. I filed them because filing documents is my job, and it is not my job to make judgments about their content. He stopped typing. He was quiet for a moment. I would like to think that the reason I filed them rather than destroyed them was because I believed that someday, someone would come looking. He turned to look at me over his shoulder. What do you need? We worked through the rest of the day and into the evening. What emerged from the archive, layer by layer, was not a single dramatic discovery, but something more like the slow, sickening process of a picture coming into focus. Each new document, adding detail. Each connection between files revealing a structure that had been invisible, when you could only see one part of it at a time. The Theric hegemony's operation involving human beings had not been conducted by a single department or a single official. It had been a distributed system, running across multiple hegemony agencies, coordinated through a series of intermediary offices that did not officially communicate with each other. The labor routing through those offices, the classification paperwork running through the diplomatic bureau, the transit documentation running through logistics, and at the top, visible only if you could see all three streams simultaneously, a small group of senior hegemony officials whose names appeared in enough of the right documents to make the coordination undeniable. And woven through all of it, in ways that were careful and layered and very difficult to see until you had assembled enough of the picture, were traces of council involvement, not direct participation in most cases, but something equally damaging: awareness. Awareness, and the sustained decision not to see what the awareness was showing. By the time the station's lights shifted to their evening setting, I had enough to fill a formal presentation to the full council. More than enough. Enough that even the people who most wanted to suppress what Doss had said would have to contend with documents that existed in the official archive, filed under official headings, visible to anyone with appropriate access who was willing to look. Owen sat back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. What do we do with this? Tomorrow morning, I said. I am going to request emergency speaking time at the council session. I am going to present everything we found, all of it, in front of every representative, on the official record. Draven will try to block it. He'll try, I said. He won't succeed. The emergency session protocols allow any senior diplomat to address the full body during an active first contact situation. We are technically in a first contact situation. I paused. The first honest one humanity has had in 340 years. Owen nodded slowly. And Commander Doss, I'm going to send her everything we found tonight, I said, so that when I present it tomorrow, she knows exactly what is in the record, and her team can be ready. Ben Caro, at his terminal on the far side of the room, said quietly without turning around, I can prepare certified copies of every document you've identified. Archive certification means they cannot be challenged as unofficial reproductions. It will take me several hours. Please, I said. He nodded and began. Owen and I sat in the cool archive room, surrounded by the quiet hum of servers and the soft click of Ben Caro's keyboard, and I thought about what tomorrow would look like, and about Doss up on her ship, and about my grandmother's name was Isla Doss, and about 43 people who had boarded a Theric vessel on a colony called Harrow's Point, and had never come home. 340 years. The number felt different now. Not smaller, not easier, but real, in a way that numbers only become when you have seen the evidence behind them, when you have held the documents and read the names, and followed the transit routes, and understood, all the way down, what the number actually means. It means people. It means lives. It means a species that was used and hidden and officially erased, which found a way, over generations, to fight back with the only tools available to a people the galaxy had decided did not officially exist. And tomorrow, I was going to stand in a room full of the people who had let it happen, and I was going to read the documents into the official record, and whatever came next was going to come next. I was not afraid of it. I was, after 3 centuries, finally ready for it. She came alone. That was what I kept coming back to, even as the emergency session was being called to order, even as Councillor Draven was being given the floor by the session chair, even as the murmur of 41 species representatives filled the chamber with the specific kind of nervous energy that precedes something irreversible. Commander Yael Doss had walked across the docking bridge of Concordia Station alone, carrying nothing, to meet a council diplomat she had never spoken to, and had no particular reason to trust. She had come alone because she was not afraid. That was the obvious interpretation. But I had been thinking about it since the night before, and I had reached a different conclusion. She had come alone because she understood something about the nature of what she was doing that many people in that chamber did not yet understand. She was not making a military statement. She was making a moral one. A person who comes alone, unarmed, across a neutral threshold to speak the truth does not need protection, because protection is what you need when you are not sure the ground beneath you is solid. She was sure. Draven was speaking. He was very good. I had always acknowledged that, even when I disagreed with him on everything else. He had the ability to make the most alarming situations sound manageable, the most complex ethical crisis sound procedural, the most urgent question sound like a matter that deserved careful extended study. He was doing all of that now, framing the conversation around the unyielding memory's presence in sovereign space, around the legal definition of unilateral first contact, around the rights and responsibilities of the Council when faced with an unregistered species making demands. He had not once, in 8 minutes of speaking, used the word crime. He had not once used the phrase human beings. He had not once acknowledged what the transmission had actually said. I watched the faces around the chamber. Some were following Draven with the focused attention of people who find his framing comfortable. Some were watching him with the slightly glazed expression of people who are listening to the words and hearing the absence inside them. And a very few, were looking at the floor, or at their hands, or at the high windows, with the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who already know something they have not yet admitted to knowing. Those were the ones I watched most carefully. When Draven paused to accept a water cup from his aide, I spoke. "Session Chair," I said. "I am exercising my right as a senior diplomat in active service during a registered first contact event to address the full council." The session chair, a careful administrator of many years named Petra Solon, looked at me with an expression that was entirely neutral, the expression of someone who is maintaining neutrality as an act of will, rather than as a reflection of feeling. "The right is acknowledged," she said. "Senior diplomat Ketharan has the floor." Draven looked at me. His expression did not change. He was too experienced for that. But I saw him recalibrate. A tiny adjustment in his posture. The particular quality of attention that a skilled chess player brings to the board when they realize the game is not going in the direction they planned. "Thank you, Chair Solon," I said. I stood, and I picked up the data tablet that held the certified archive documents that Ben Caro had spent most of the night preparing, and I looked around the chamber. 340 years ago, I said, a Theric hegemony exploration vessel made contact with a planet called Earth. The room went very still. That contact was not reported to the Council. It was not registered in the formal first contact record. It was classified internally by the hegemony as a resource assessment, and the subsequent relationship between the hegemony and the people of Earth was conducted entirely outside of Council oversight for the following 2.5 centuries. I paused. I let the silence do its work. I have spent the last 36 hours reviewing the Council's archive. What follows is a summary of what that archive contains, supported by certified copies of primary documents which I am now submitting to the official session record. Draven said, "Chair Solon, I object to the submission of documents that have not been reviewed by the appropriate session protocol," said Petra Solon, in a voice that was quiet and entirely firm. "Allows for documentary evidence submission during first contact proceedings, without prior committee review, when the submitting diplomat holds senior classification clearance. Senior diplomat Ketharan holds that clearance." She looked at Draven for a moment that lasted 1 beat longer than was strictly necessary. "Please continue, Ketharan." I continued. I told them about the transit records. I told them about the classification codes. I told them about the pre-contact designation used as a legal mechanism to strip human settlements of Council protection. I told them about 43 workers from a colony called Harrow's Point who signed labor contracts and never came back. I told them about 17 major recovery operations conducted by the Earth Sovereignty Navy over 40 years of undeclared conflict. I told them about 84,000 people. I watched the room change as I spoke. Some of the faces went blank in the specific way that faces go blank when a person is trying not to show what they are feeling, because what they are feeling is something they cannot afford to show. Some of the faces went red, or their species equivalent of that color, with a mixture of anger and discomfort. Some of the faces did something that I had rarely seen in a council chamber. They opened, just slightly, with the particular quality of a person hearing something they already knew, somewhere beneath the surface of their official positions, and feeling the particular kind of relief that comes when the unspoken thing is finally spoken. Councillor Mira Vane of the Salith Compact was one of those. She was small and precise, and had been a member of the council for longer than I had, and I had always found her politics somewhat more cautious than I preferred, but I had never questioned her fundamental honesty. She was looking at me now with an expression that was several things at once: shame and recognition, and a kind of quiet determination that I had not seen on her face before, not in all the years I had known her. I presented the document chain from the Hegemony's Logistics Bureau. I presented the coordination records from the Diplomatic Classification Office. I presented the archive entries that showed awareness of the situation within Council intelligence agencies. Draven tried to speak twice more. Petra Solon overruled him both times, citing session protocol with the patient precision of someone who has memorized every rule in the book, specifically so that she cannot be outmaneuvered by them. When I finished, I set the tablet on the desk in front of me and sat down. The chamber was quiet for a moment. Then it was not quiet at all. I call for an immediate motion to classify the submitted documents, pending full committee review, Draven said. His voice was perfectly controlled, but the speed of the response told me something. He had been preparing for this moment. He had known, perhaps since the first searches on my terminal, that the archive was going to be opened, and he had a procedural counter ready. Seconded, said 3 voices immediately, which told me the counter had been coordinated. The motion to classify submitted session documents requires a full council vote, Petra Solon said. We will proceed. The vote was called. I already knew how it would go, not from certainty about individuals, but from the arithmetic of power, the way alliances and economic relationships translate into session votes. The hegemony had enough directly aligned council members to pass the classification motion. They always had. That was how they had maintained the situation for so long. The vote proceeded. Species by species, representative by representative. I watched the count on the session display. Then something unexpected happened. 3 species I had not expected to break with the hegemony bloc did. The Orev Confederation, which had been a hegemony trade partner for 2 centuries. The Delk Assembly, which had never in my memory voted against a hegemony-sponsored motion. And the Meret Collective, a small but vocal member species whose representative was a young diplomat named Callan Hart, who had been on the council for less than 2 years, and who voted against the classification motion with a directness that was almost startling in a chamber where most votes were carefully hedged. The motion still passed. The documents were classified pending review. Draven's expression showed exactly nothing. But the margin was narrower than it had been in any comparable vote in the last decade, and 3 species had publicly broken from the hegemony bloc for the first time in living memory. Mira Vane caught my eye from across the chamber. She gave me a look that meant, "This is not over." I gave her one back that meant, "I know." The session chair called a recess. The chamber erupted into the kind of conversation that is only quiet, in the sense that people are using their inside voices while saying extremely loud things. I stood and picked up my tablet and moved toward the exit, and Owen appeared at my side, as if he had materialized there, which is his particular talent. "Callan Hart," he said quietly, "the Merit Collective representative." "I noticed," I said. "He has been filing information requests with the archive office for 6 months," Owen said, "under a general research heading. Nothing that triggered any specific monitoring flags. I found his request logs this morning." "He already knew something," I said. "He had a direction," Owen said. "He was looking in the right area, but he did not have clearance deep enough to find the primary documents. I think he has been waiting for someone with the right clearance to open the file." "Then we should talk to him," I said. "He's waiting in the side corridor," Owen said. He asked one of my counterparts on the Merit delegation to arrange a quiet word. I looked at my aide with the expression I reserve for moments when I am genuinely impressed. Owen's face did what it always does, which is give absolutely nothing away, which is also impressive. We found Callan Hart in the corridor outside the chamber, standing near a water station with the particular kind of casual alertness that young diplomats adopt when they are trying not to look as though they are waiting for something important. He was not quite 30 years old, with a careful, intelligent face, and the look of someone who has been doing a great deal of reading recently, and has not been sleeping particularly well. "Senior diplomat," he said when I approached. "Thank you for the presentation." "You broke your block," I said. "My block broke itself some time ago," he said quietly. "I have just been waiting for the right moment to acknowledge that publicly." He paused. "The documents you submitted, the certified copies. The session has classified them, but the classification applies to the session record. It does not apply to copies that were transmitted outside the session before the classification vote." I looked at him. "Is that a hypothetical observation?" "It is a precise legal observation," he said. "I was a legal scholar before I became a diplomat. I am very careful about precision." He met my eyes. "There are 2 other species whose representatives would like a quiet word with you before the session reconvenes. They did not vote with me today, because they were not ready. They may be ready soon, if they have a reason to be." "What would make them ready?" Owen asked. "Evidence," Callan Hart said. "Real, specific, direct evidence that connects the actions described in your presentation to individual officials by name. The transit records and classification documents you presented are compelling. But compelling is not the same as undeniable. For undeniable, you need names." "I have names," I said. He did not react visibly, but his eyes did something. A steadying, a sharpening. "Then," he said carefully, "I think we should continue this conversation somewhere with fewer observers." We went to Ben Caro's archive room, which was by that point something close to an unofficial operations room. Ben himself was still at his terminal, working with the serene focus of a person who has decided on a course of action and is simply executing it. 2 of Owen's contacts from other delegations were reading documents on secondary terminals. Callan Hart sat down and looked at what was on the screens, and did not say anything for almost 5 minutes. Then he said, "How much of this is in the official archive?" "All of it," Ben Caro said, without turning around. "Filed in the wrong places, and cross-referenced incorrectly, but present. I have been working here for 31 years. I have filed a great many of these documents myself. I know exactly where they are." Callan Hart looked at the back of the archivist's head with an expression of something that was close to reverence. "Has anyone contacted the human vessel with this information?" "I sent a secure transmission this morning," I said. Commander Doss's communications officer acknowledged receipt. "Good," he said. "Then we need to talk about the session reconvening in." He checked the time. "Approximately 70 minutes. And what happens in that session if we are ready? And what happens if we are not?" Owen placed a list on the desk in front of Hart. It was a list of names, senior hegemony officials whose names appeared in multiple documents in the archive, in ways that made their individual roles in the operation clear and specific. Some of the names I had recognized from the current council session. Some were historical figures. All of them were documented. Hart read the list carefully. He looked up. 2 of these individuals are currently on the station." "Yes," I said. "In the hegemony delegation?" "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. The human commander asked for a public accounting before the full council. "As one of her 3 conditions, yes," I said. "A public accounting with named individuals would be different from a general presentation of archive evidence," he said. "It would be significantly harder to classify after the fact. Individual names in session record are a matter of formal diplomatic documentation. The classification protocols for named individuals in session record are much stricter. They require a 2/3 council majority rather than a simple majority." He looked at me. "Did Draven know about that when he called the classification vote?" "I don't know," I said. "I think he didn't," Hart said. "I think he moved fast, to classify before you could present names. He was protecting the category rather than the individuals, because he assumed the individuals could be protected if the category was suppressed." He set down the list. He was wrong. I looked at the list. 21 names. 21 individuals, each documented in the archive with enough specificity to constitute a formal complaint before the council's legal office. 21 people who had made decisions, sustained operations, signed documents, and ensured that 3 centuries of harm remained invisible. "What do you need from me?" I asked Hart. "The specific document citations for each name on this list," he said, "and approximately 70 minutes. "What happens in 70 minutes?" "The session reconvenes," he said, "and this time, I will be the one asking for the floor." He pulled a terminal toward himself and began working. Owen sat down next to him and began feeding him the document citations from memory, which told me that Owen had been doing what Owen always does in a crisis, reading everything twice and remembering all of it. I stood and walked to the back of the room and leaned against the wall and looked at the group of people assembled in this cool, quiet space, full of servers and old documents, and I felt something that I had not felt in a very long time. Hope is not the right word for it. Hope is too light, too clean. What I felt was something heavier than hope, but pointed in the same direction. A sense that the world was in the process of correcting itself, slowly, and with difficulty, and at the cost of many things, but correcting, moving, finally, in the right direction. In 60 minutes, the session chair sent a message requesting all diplomatic staff return to the chamber. In the chamber, Draven was already in his seat, his expression composed and unreadable. He had done something with the recess. I could see it in the way the hegemony block had closed in around him, the quiet precision of a group that has received new instructions and is ready to act on them. Petra Solon called the session to order. Before Draven could speak, Callan Hart stood up. "Chair Solon," he said, "I am requesting the floor under the provisions that allow documentary complaint filing during active first contact proceedings." Solon looked at him. She looked at the session clock. "The provision is acknowledged," she said. "Representative Hart has the floor." Draven's expression did not change, but I saw his hands, which were resting on the table in front of him, make a very small, very controlled movement, a tightening, just for a moment, before he consciously relaxed them. "Thank you, Chair Solon," said Callan Hart. He was 29 years old, and he was standing in front of the full Galactic Council, and his voice was absolutely steady. "I am submitting a formal complaint for the session record, supported by certified archive documentation, naming the following individuals as parties responsible for crimes against the people of Earth, committed over the period of 340 years. He began to read the list. The room was very, very quiet. 21 names, each one followed by the precise archive citations of the documents that proved it. Each one entered into the session record with the formal language of a legal filing that would require a 2/3 majority to suppress, a majority that Draven did not have, had never expected to need, and had not prepared for. When Hart finished reading, the silence lasted 4 full seconds. Then Draven stood up, and for the first time in 30 years of watching him work, I saw Councillor Draven of the Theric Hegemony do something I had never seen him do before. He looked at the list on the session display. His name was third on it, and his expression cracked, just for a moment, just enough to see what was underneath. What was underneath was not anger. It was fear. And in that moment, I understood that the galactic peace that this chamber had spent 3,000 years congratulating itself on maintaining was not ending. It had never really begun. What was beginning, right now, in this room, was something different, something harder to build and harder to break, something that could not be sustained with paperwork and silence and carefully filed documents in the wrong places. Something, for the first time, worth protecting. Hart sat down. He was shaking very slightly, which I only noticed because I was watching carefully. He folded his hands on the table in front of him and looked straight ahead and did not move. Owen passed me a note. It said, "Commander Doss sends her regards to the council." I looked at the window. Outside, through the high glass, the unyielding memory was still there. Patient, certain, right where it had always said it would be. The motion to suppress came within 4 minutes of Hartzy's filing. It was fast, too fast for something that was supposed to be a spontaneous response to an unexpected development. The language was prepared. The signatories were already attached. The procedural framing was precise. Someone had drafted that motion before the session reconvened. Someone had been sitting on it, waiting to see if it became necessary, and had made the decision to use it before Hart had even finished reading the 21st name. That speed told me something. It told me that Draven had not been surprised by the names on the list. He had known, or suspected, that the document chain in the archive was traceable to individuals. He had been prepared for this moment, but had expected to manage it differently, through the prior classification vote, through the window of suppression that the simpler classification motion would have created. When that window was used up by the time Hart filed the formal complaint, the fallback was already ready. What Draven had not prepared for, because he could not have predicted it, was the thing that happened in the chamber while the suppression motion was being read into the record. Mira Vane stood up. She had not asked for the floor. She had not signaled the session chair. She simply stood, and the quality of her standing was such that Petra Solon paused the reading of the suppression motion and looked at her, and the chamber followed Solon's eyes, and everyone went quiet. "Chair Solon," said Mira Vane, in a voice that was absolutely composed and carried across the entire chamber without effort. "I have served on this council for 167 years. In that time, I have voted in many sessions on many questions, and I have not always been on the right side of those votes. I intend to be on the right side of this one." She sat back down. It was 10 seconds of speech, but in those 10 seconds, something shifted in the room. A redistribution of weight, a rebalancing of the invisible scales that every political body has, and that experienced observers learn to feel, rather than see. Mira Vane had not announced how she would vote. She had not made a policy argument. She had simply placed herself, publicly and on the record, on a particular side of a moral question, and in doing so, she had given permission to every other person in the room who had been sitting with the same choice, and had not yet felt they could make it. The reading of the suppression motion resumed. The vote was called. I watched the count on the session display. The suppression motion needed a simple majority, 30 of 41. Under normal circumstances, with the hegemony block intact, it would have passed with numbers to spare. The names on Hart's formal complaint list had changed the calculus significantly, because voting to suppress a legal complaint that included named individuals was a different act than voting to classify general archival documents. It was closer to an act of obstruction, and obstruction under active legal complaint proceedings carried personal liability in the Council's own code. Several species that had voted with Draven on the first motion did not vote with him on this one. The suppression motion failed by 8 votes. The chamber was very quiet for the specific kind of moment that follows an unexpected outcome, the kind of moment where the weight of what just happened is being silently processed by everyone present. Then Draven stood up. He was controlled. He was always controlled. But there was something different in his posture now, a quality of effort that had not been there before, as if the composure that had always come naturally to him was now something he had to actively maintain. "Chair Solon," he said, "the Tharic hegemony requests an adjournment of no less than 24 hours to allow appropriate legal counsel to review the validity of the complaint filing. The request for adjournment is noted," Petra Solon said. "The session protocols in active first contact proceedings do not permit adjournment of more than 6 hours without a 2/3 vote. We will recess for 6 hours. The full session will reconvene at," she checked the session clock, 0700 tomorrow morning. Draven sat down. He did not look at me. He did not look at Hart. He looked at the table in front of him with the expression of a person who is rapidly revising a great many assumptions and is not finding the revision comfortable. The recess was called. The chamber erupted into the kind of noise that is technically conversation, but is actually a great many people thinking loudly in each other's presence. Owen was beside me immediately. "3 priority messages," he said. 2 from council member delegations requesting a meeting. 1 from Commander Doss. "Doss first," I said. He showed me the message. It was short. "We are aware of the session developments. We are monitoring. The 96-hour window remains in effect. We appreciate what is happening in that room." I wrote back, "What happens at the end of 96 hours if the council has not responded to your demands?" Her reply came in less than 2 minutes. "That is a question with an answer we prefer not to give before we have to." I understood. I understood. The answer was not a threat, exactly. It was a measure. It was the limit of how long the people on that ship, and the people they represented, were willing to wait for a process they had never been able to trust to work in their favor. The clock was not a negotiating tactic. It was a survival decision, made by people who had learned through 3 centuries of experience that waiting indefinitely for justice is indistinguishable from accepting the absence of it. I looked at Owen. "What are the other 2 messages?" "The Orev Confederation and the Delk Assembly," he said, both requesting private meetings. These are the two that broke with the hegemony bloc in the first vote. Yes, and I think I know what they want to discuss. They want to know how bad it gets, I said. For them. If the full evidence is entered into session record, if the formal complaints proceed, if the hegemony's operation is publicly acknowledged, how much of what they were involved in, or aware of, or adjacent to, comes out with it? Owen nodded. That is my assessment, yes. Then we need to have those conversations, I said. Not to offer protection. I cannot offer protection, and I would not if I could. But because if they have information we don't have, we need it. And if they are willing to testify, that matters. He nodded. There is one more thing, he said. I received a message from an address I didn't recognize. It appears to be from someone inside the hegemony delegation. I looked at him sharply. What does it say? He showed me the message. It was 3 lines long. I have documents that are not in the council archive. I cannot send them through official channels. I need a secure meeting. I am willing to testify. The name at the bottom was one I did not recognize from the official hegemony delegation roster. Verification? I asked. The message contains a file signature that cross-references to a specific archive document we identified this morning, Owen said. A document that was not in any of the publicly searchable sections. If this person could identify that document and use its file signature as a verification code, they have genuine access to hegemony internal records. I looked at the message again. Someone inside the hegemony delegation. Someone who had access to documents that were not in any archive accessible to us. Someone who was willing to testify. How many people know about this message? I asked. Only me, Owen said. I screened it before bringing it to you. I did not log it through the official diplomatic message system. Set up the meeting, I said. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere the hegemony security detail doesn't have coverage. I paused. And Owen, be careful. He nodded. He put his terminal away and moved through the crowd in the chamber exit with the particular quality of invisibility that Owen had. The ability to be in a room without seeming to be notable in it. To move through busy spaces without anyone thinking they needed to pay attention. It was a remarkable skill. I had benefited from it many times. I made my way toward the delegation meeting rooms where the Orev and Delk representatives were waiting. On the way, I passed Callan Hart, standing near the corridor wall, looking at his terminal, and I stopped. Well done, I said. He looked up. He still had that slight tremor that I had noticed when he sat down, the physical residue of having done something significant in a room that is not kind to significant things. I am not certain it was the right decision, he said. You were certain when you made it, I said. I was committed when I made it, he said. That is not the same thing. He paused. My government will want a briefing. I have been ahead of my instructions on this, to say the least. What will they say? They will say that I acted correctly, he said slowly, because that is what governments say when something turns out to have been the right call. If it had not turned out to be the right call, they would say I acted without authorization. He looked at me with an expression that was wry and tired in equal measure. This is the nature of diplomacy. It is, I said. Will you be at the morning session? I will be at every session until this is finished, he said. I would like to be on the right side of this for more than one vote. He looked down at his terminal again. My counterpart from the Merit Scientific Institute just sent me a message. They have been monitoring Tharic hegemony transit signal patterns for the last 3 years, as part of a study on irregular cargo movement. They have data. He looked up. A great deal of data. Can we have it before tomorrow morning? I am asking now, he said. He went back to his terminal. I went to find the Orev and Delk representatives. They were where Owen had said they would be. A small meeting room off the main corridor. The kind of room that exists in every diplomatic station for conversations that need to happen out of sight of the general bustle. 2 representatives sitting across from each other with the careful distance of people who are not sure they are allies but are very sure they are in the same situation. The Orev representative was named Dal Farran, a senior diplomat of considerable experience who had the bearing of someone who is used to being the most powerful person in any given room, and is currently experiencing the novelty of not being sure that is the case. The Delk representative was someone I had met briefly years ago, a woman named Nora Ashby, who was technically human by origin, one of a small number of humans who had been born in Delk territory, under circumstances that I now understood quite differently than I had before yesterday. That detail struck me as I sat down. "Representative Ashby," I said, "have you been—" "My family has been in Delk territory for 4 generations," she said, anticipating the question. "We came there legally, under a Delk immigration program, 130 years ago. We are Delk citizens. I represent the Delk Assembly." She looked at me with an expression that was both composed and carrying something very compressed inside it. "I am also aware that the situation you have been describing in that chamber is something that affected people who looked like me, and that the legal distinctions that meant my family's path was different from theirs are distinctions that were being actively manipulated by the hegemony to ensure that only some humans had protection." A pause. "I have been aware of this for longer than I have had the authority to say so officially." I looked at her. "You have information." "I have had information for 6 years," she said, "presented through the appropriate internal Delk channels, where it was received, reviewed, and considered politically inconvenient at the time. The political calculus has now changed. So the Delk Assembly sent you here to tell me what you know," I said. "The Delk Assembly sent me here to represent their interests in the morning session," she said. "What I am telling you now is on my own authority, because I have been waiting 6 years to tell someone who could use it, and I do not think I should wait longer." What she told me over the next 40 minutes was detailed, specific, and in several places filled gaps in the document chain that Ben Caro and I had not been able to close the night before. She had been tracking the hegemony's operation from a different angle, not through the archive, but through the financial networks, the trade agreements, the production contracts that had fed the economic interests built on top of the human labor system. She had numbers. She had bank records. She had the financial anatomy of the operation, which is a different and in many ways more damning kind of evidence than the administrative archive, because financial records are not filed in the wrong places. They are buried in plain sight, in exactly the places where the money was supposed to look like legitimate commerce. Dal Ferran listened as she spoke. He did not interrupt. Halfway through, he set his own terminal on the table and pulled up a file. "I have something that may fit with this," he said. He said it quietly, not with pride or relief, but with the specific quality of a person paying a debt they have owed for a long time. What he had was a record from the Orev Confederation's intelligence service, a report filed 11 years ago describing a meeting between senior hegemony officials and Orev trade representatives at which certain arrangements had been discussed. The Orev intelligence service had filed the report internally. It had been classified and not acted upon, because acting upon it had, at the time, seemed likely to damage trade relationships that the Confederation valued more than it valued the consequences of looking away. "The official who attended that meeting from our side," Dal Ferran said, "is now retired. The Confederation has decided that his cooperation with the investigation, if an investigation proceeds, is preferable to his silence." He paused. "He has agreed to testify. A retired Orev trade official with direct knowledge of a meeting, a human diplomat with 6 years of financial records, a Merit Collective legal scholar with an archive of named complaints, and somewhere on the other side of the station wall, a person from inside the hegemony delegation who had sent a message through an unofficial channel saying they had documents and were willing to speak." I thought about Draven, sitting in his delegation rooms right now, and about the speed with which he had filed the suppression motion, and about the fear I had seen on his face for that single unguarded moment. He was working with the tools he had always worked with: process, procedure, the procedural ability to slow and classify and delay. He was very good with those tools. He had been using them for a very long time. But the tools only work when the information is sufficiently contained, when the number of people who know the critical facts is small enough to manage, when the walls are solid enough to prevent leakage in too many directions at once. The walls had been breached in quite a few places now. I stood and thanked both representatives and went back to Ben Caro's archive room, where Owen was already waiting, seated next to a woman I did not recognize, mid-30s, with the careful posture of someone who has been nervous for a long time and has learned to hold it very still. "Kethoran," Owen said, "this is Nina Croft. She is an administrative attaché on the Theric hegemony delegation." Nina Croft looked at me with eyes that were steady and frightened in equal proportions. "I don't have a great deal of time," she said. "My shift logs will show a gap that I've covered as a maintenance call. but that window closes in about 40 minutes. What do you have? I asked. She opened a small data drive and set it on the table. I have been the keeper of Counselor Draven's official correspondence files for 7 years, she said. Part of my role includes maintaining the archival backup of all official communications, including the ones that are designated for restricted circulation. She looked at the data drive. 3 months ago, I was filing a restricted communication when I misread the classification code and opened a file I was not supposed to open. I read it before I realized what it was. What was in it? I asked. It was a communication between Counselor Draven and the Hegemony Home Fleet Admiral. It was from approximately 3 years ago. It was discussing what they described as a contingency protocol. She looked up at me. For the event that the Earth situation became unsustainable. The room was very quiet. What did the contingency protocol involve? I asked. She swallowed. Several things. The destruction of the archive sections most relevant to the operation. The reclassification of Earth under a security threat designation, which would have allowed the Council to place the entire solar system under quarantine. And, she paused, the deployment of a hegemony fleet element to the outer settlement zones where the highest concentration of Earth sovereignty Navy activity had been detected. To engage the human fleet, I said. The language in the document, she said carefully, was about neutralizing an irregular military threat before it could reach Council space. She looked at me directly. I understood what that meant. I looked at her. You could have reported this 3 years ago. I could have, she said. I didn't. I filed the document in the correct place and tried to tell myself I had misunderstood it, and for 3 years, I lived with the fact that I had not misunderstood it at all. Her voice was steady. When the unyielding memory came out of hyperspace above this station 2 days ago, I thought, this is the last chance. This is the last moment where any of it can still be fixed rather than just survived. Owen looked at me over the top of her head. His expression said, this is real. I looked at the data drive. Can you copy the document? I already did, she said. It's on the drive, along with 8 others I found after the first one, once I knew what I was looking for. She pushed the drive toward me. There is one more thing I should tell you. The communication I described, the one about the contingency protocol, was dated 3 years ago. There is a follow-up message from 6 months ago, indicating that the protocol has been activated on preliminary status. Preliminary status, which meant that somewhere, a hegemony fleet element had been placed on readiness, waiting not for an order to stand down but for an order to move. 96 hours. The number felt different now, more precise, more urgent. Not the generous time frame of a patient adversary, but the narrow window of a situation that was already in motion and would not stay still for much longer. Nina, I said, you cannot go back to the hegemony delegation after this. She nodded. I know. Are you willing to testify formally? In the morning session? On the official record? Yes, she said. It came out without hesitation, which told me she had made this decision before she came to find us. I've been making this decision for 3 years. I'm tired of having made it and not acted on it. I looked at her. Nina Croft, administrative attaché, 30-something years old, 7 years of filing other people's secret correspondence. Someone who had read a document she was not supposed to read, and had spent 3 years trying to put it back where she found it, and had now, at the last possible moment, chosen a different path. The people who change the course of large events are rarely the ones you expect. They are rarely the powerful or the prominent. They are often the ones who happen to be in the right place at the wrong time, and found, when it mattered, that they could not look away. Owen was already on his terminal, arranging protective protocols. I sent an emergency message to Petra Solon requesting the session chair's personal attention before the morning reconvening. I sent another message to Commander Doss. Something important has developed. New documentary evidence and a witness with direct knowledge of the contingency protocol. The morning session will be significant. Her reply came in seconds. We will be watching. Be careful tonight, Ketharan. I looked at that message for a moment. Then I looked at the group assembled in this archive room, an honest archivist and a young idealistic diplomat and an Orev trade representative paying a debt and a human diplomat with 6 years of financial records and a frightened attaché who had made a very late but very real choice. And I thought about what was going to happen in the morning. Not the peace that had been sold to the galaxy for 3,000 years. Not the peace that had been built on hidden costs and bureaucratic blindness, and the systematic erasure of a species that was never supposed to become inconvenient. Something else. Something harder. Something that would take much longer to build, and would require far more honesty than anything this council had attempted in living memory. But something that might, if we were careful and thorough, and did not lose our nerve in the morning, actually deserve the name. The archive hummed around us. Ben Caro typed steadily. Outside the station hull, in the dark between the stars, the unyielding memory waited. Patient, steady, certain that morning would come. The message arrived at 4 a.m. station time, while most of the diplomatic staff on Concordia were asleep, and the corridors were nearly empty. Owen was not asleep. Owen had not slept in approximately 36 hours, which I knew because I had not slept in approximately 36 hours either, and Owen had been within 10 meters of me for most of that time. He was at the terminal in the archive room, cross-referencing the financial records Nora Ashby had provided with the logistics documentation from Ben Caro's files, when his terminal chimed with a priority notification. He looked at the notification. He looked at me. "ESN signal," he said. "Commander Doss, it's marked urgent." I moved to look at the screen. The message was short. "We have received an encrypted communication from inside Hegemony Command. The preliminary activation of the contingency protocol that your witness described has advanced. We are now reading it as active status rather than preliminary. Revised assessment of Hegemony fleet movement time to Council space, 40 to 50 hours. Our 96-hour window was based on preliminary status. We are revising our timeline. The morning session needs to move faster than planned." 40 to 50 hours. I looked at the message for a moment that felt longer than it was. Then I sent a message to Petra Solon marked urgent. "Session Chair, the situation has developed. I need to speak with you before dawn." Her reply came in 8 minutes, which told me she had been awake too. "I will be in my office in 20. I sent a second message to Commander Doss. "Understood. What do you need from the Council in the next 12 hours? Her reply was more detailed. "We need 3 things immediately. A formal Council acknowledgement that the evidence submitted constitutes grounds for investigation under the Interspecies Accountability Framework. An emergency resolution declaring the Theric hegemony in breach of Council compact, pending the outcome of that investigation, and the coordinates of any hegemony fleet positions that the Council's intelligence services have tracked in the last 72 hours. I read the list. "The third item," I said to Owen, "is the hardest one," he said. "Council military intelligence files are classified above my clearance and above yours. Even in an emergency session, accessing those files requires the session chair's authorization and a 2/3 majority vote." "Then we need more votes," I said. "How many do we need?" 28, he said, "at minimum." "We have 12 committed," I said, counting through what the morning had already shown us. "Possibly 14, with the Orev and Delk delegations." "We need 14 more," Owen said. "In the next few hours." "Yes." I looked at Ben Caro, who had been listening to this exchange from his terminal, with the steady attention of a man who knows the weight of information. "Ben," I said, "which species in this council have had the longest-running independent grievances with the hegemony?" He did not need to think. The Yell Federation has been in a trade dispute with the hegemony for 50 years, over mineral extraction rights in the Sithara sector. The Merit Collective. You already have them. The pre-Commonwealth has had border friction with hegemony expansion forces for 3 decades. The Solene Union lost 2 research vessels in contested space 8 years ago, under circumstances they consider highly suspicious. The Anseth have never publicly explained why they withdrew their trade representative from the hegemony capital 11 years ago, but the withdrawal was abrupt. He paused. "And the Karath bloc has been asking for a review of the Council's transit corridor regulations for 15 years, a review the hegemony has consistently blocked. 6 possible additions. With the 12 we had, that would be 18, potentially. Still short of the 28 needed, but closer. The pre-Commonwealth has a representative who owes me a professional debt from the resolution of the Sithera border arbitration 12 years ago," I said. "Owen, send him a message. Personal, not official. Tell him I am calling it in." Owen was already typing. "I'll contact the Yell Federation through Hart," I said. "He has a relationship with their trade office. And the Solene Union, do we know who their current representative is? A woman named Edna Marsh, Ben said. Very junior, first posting on the council. She was a naval investigator before she became a diplomat. She was part of the team that investigated the research vessel incident. A naval investigator who spent years looking at suspicious incidents, Owen said. He stopped typing. He looked at me. She already knows something is wrong. She's been sitting in these sessions for 6 months watching the hegemony block, and knowing something is wrong, and not having the standing or the evidence to say so. Find her, I said. Now. Whatever it takes. Owen left the room at a pace that was not quite running, but was as close to running as Owen ever gets in public. I looked at Ben. The Anseth withdrawal, I said. The trade representative who left the hegemony capital 11 years ago. Do we know who they were? His name was Cross Ward, Ben said. He was a senior Anseth trade official. He resigned his position 6 months after returning from the hegemony capital and has not appeared in any official capacity since. He paused. The Anseth filed no formal complaint at the time, but the resignation of a senior trade official, without public explanation, is unusual for a species as structured as the Anseth. Do we have a current contact for him? No, Ben said. But the Anseth delegation on this station includes a representative named Lou Crane, who was Cross Ward's junior colleague at the time of the withdrawal. Get me a meeting with Crane, I said, as soon as possible. Ben pulled up a contact directory and began searching. I took the data drive that Nina Croft had left with us and copied its contents to the encrypted partition of the archive system that Ben had set up specifically for this investigation, the one that was not connected to any externally accessible server. Then I sent a verified copy of the Draven Fleet Admiral communication to Petra Solin's secure terminal, marked with a note. This is from an internal hegemony source. The witness is prepared to testify. This document changes the nature of the morning session. I made my way to Solin's office. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at her desk with a cup of something warm, and the expression of someone who has been running very large problems through their head and has reached a place of hard clarity. Petra Solin had been council session chair for 22 years. She had managed crises before. She had managed disputes and legal challenges, and the kind of procedural trench warfare that fills long sessions when powerful species disagree on things they care about. She had never managed anything like this. She had already read the document I sent. The preliminary protocol, she said when I sat down, and now you're telling me it's active. As of a few hours ago, per the ESN intelligence assessment, I said. She was quiet for a moment. How reliable is the ESN's intelligence? Extremely, I said. They have been gathering intelligence on the hegemony for 40 years. They have access to channels we don't have, through methods I don't entirely understand. But everything they have told us has been corroborated by what we've found in our own archive. She turned her cup in her hands. What we need to accomplish in the morning session is more complex than what we planned last night. Yes, I said. And faster. The intelligence file motion will be the sticking point, she said. Even with everything that has happened, a 2/3 vote to open military intelligence files is... I know, I said. We're working on votes. We may not have all 28, but we are going to get as close as we can. She looked at me. There is something else I want to say to you, Ketharan. Say it. When you spoke yesterday, when you presented the archive findings, several people in that chamber were visibly affected. Not performing affect, genuinely affected. I am talking about representatives who have been voting with the hegemony bloc for years, not out of conviction but out of, she searched for the word, inertia, the comfort of not having to recalculate. She paused. The morning session has an opportunity to be different from anything this council has done in a very long time, but it requires the session to feel different as well as to vote differently. Do you understand what I mean? You want it to be honest, I said. I want it to be real, she said. I want people in that chamber to feel what they are actually dealing with, not manage it from a procedural distance. I thought of Doss, walking across the docking bridge alone. I think Commander Doss can help with that, I said. I would like to invite her to address the council directly, not through a communication, in person. Solin looked at me for a long moment. The protocols for addressing a non-member species to the full council during an active session. The protocols require session chair approval and a simple majority vote, I said. We have the majority. You have the authority. She set down her cup. Yes, she said. All right, she stood. I will issue the invitation through official channels in the next hour. What time should we plan the direct address? After the vote count on the intelligence files, I said. If we have the votes, she addresses the council with the intelligence on the table. If we don't, I paused, she addresses them anyway, and we see if that changes the count. Solon looked at me steadily. You trust her? I trust that she has been waiting her entire life for this room, I said, and that she knows exactly what to say in it. I went back to the archive room. Owen had returned, and he had brought 2 people with him. One was Edna Marsh, the Solene Union's young naval investigator turned diplomat, who had the contained energy of someone who has just been told that a suspicion they have carried for years is about to become officially relevant. The other was Lou Crane of the Anseth delegation, who was older and quieter, and who had spent a long moment looking at the document on Ben's terminal before he said anything at all. What he said when he did speak was this. Cross Ward died 8 years ago. He told me what happened in the hegemony capital the day before he resigned. He swore me to silence because he believed they would come after him if he spoke. He paused. He was probably right, but he is gone, and they cannot come after him now, and I have been carrying what he told me for a long time. He told us what Cross Ward had told him. What Cross Ward had seen in the hegemony capital was not the worst thing I had heard in the last 2 days, but it was specific in a way that the documentary evidence was not, because it described not the mechanisms of the operation, but the thinking of the people running it. The conversation Ward had witnessed between senior hegemony officials who were discussing the human operation, not in the clinical language of administrative documents, but in the casual, comfortable language of people who had been doing something for so long that they had entirely stopped seeing it as something that required justification. It had that particular chill, not the cold of something terrible happening in secret, the cold of something terrible having become so ordinary to its perpetrators that they spoke about it over a meeting table like any other operational matter. Lou Crane was willing to testify about what Ward had told him. He understood that hearsay from a deceased source was not the strongest form of evidence, but he also understood that in the context of everything else we had, it was the part that showed the human face of the thing, the people behind the documents, making choices that documents alone could not fully convey. By the time the station's lights shifted to their morning setting, we had 18 confirmed votes and 2 maybes. 20 was still not 28, but it was closer than 6 hours ago, and the morning session had not yet started. I sent Commander Doss the update on the vote count and her official invitation to address the council in person. I added, we may not have all the votes we need before you speak. I want you to know that before you prepare. Her reply, after a brief pause, I have been preparing for this address since I was 19 years old. The vote count does not change what I am going to say. What I say may change the vote count. Then, also, the Unyielding Memories crew would like you to know that they have been following the session developments as they come through, and the mood on the ship is, the word she used was the human word, cautiously hopeful, which she added was the most positive assessment most of the crew had given anything in several years. I read that and felt something I could not have named precisely, some combination of sadness and recognition and a kind of quiet respect for people who had learned to measure hope in small, careful amounts. I went back to the archive room one more time, not to search for new documents but simply to be in the space where we had spent the night, where people who could have stayed quiet had decided not to, where an archivist who had been filing uncomfortable documents for 31 years had finally stopped doing his job quietly and started doing it deliberately. Ben Caro was still at his terminal. I thought for a moment that he had been there all night, which he had. Ben, I said, go rest for 2 hours. He looked at me over his shoulder. The certified copies aren't finished. They will be, 2 hours. He looked at his screen. He looked back at me. He made a sound that was not quite agreement, but he stood up, stretched, and moved toward the door. At the door he stopped. Keth Oren, he said. Yes? In 31 years I have filed a great many documents that I filed because it was my job to file them. I would like to think that the ones I certified last night, I certified because it was the right thing to do. He was quiet for a moment. I would like to think that. I know it, I said. He nodded and went. I sat down in the chair he had vacated and looked at the archive display with its thousands of documents and its decades of carefully misplaced truth, and I thought about what the morning would ask of everyone in that chamber, and whether they were ready for it. At 6:30, Owen came in with 2 cups of something warm, and the expression he gets when he has news, and has not yet decided in what order to deliver it. 7 more commitments, he said, handing me a cup. The pre-representative came through, and Edna Marsh worked the Solene contacts. They brought 2 more, and Callan Hart spent the last 3 hours on communications with the Yell Federation, and they are in. I looked at him. 7 more. 25 total, he said. 3 short. We're 3 short, I said. Yes, he said. The session starts in 30 minutes. He looked at the door. Commander Doss has docked at the neutral bay. She is on the station. I know, I said. I can feel it. Owen looked at me for a moment. Keth Oran. The 3 were missing. I don't think we get them before the vote. No, I said. Probably not. Then what happens if the intelligence file motion fails? I looked at the morning light beginning to come through the small window near the top of the archive room. Thin and pale. Station light. Nothing like what any of us saw through our own homeworld sky. But there. Then Commander Doss stands up in that chamber, I said, and she says what she has to say. And some of the people listening have never heard it the way she will say it. And we see if 3 people find their way to where they need to be. Owen was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I think they will. So do I said. I stood up, straightened my diplomatic sash, and went to meet the morning. In the neutral bay, Commander Doss was already waiting. She looked the same as she had 2 days ago in our first meeting. Same uniform, same quiet steadiness, same 27 pins. She had brought 2 crew members with her this time. One was a communications officer. The other was a young woman who looked about 22 and who was carrying a portable archive device, which told me Doss had come prepared to provide her own documentation if the session required it. Are you ready? I asked. I have been ready for 20 years, she said. But yes, today specifically, also yes. She walked beside me through the corridor, and I thought about what was about to happen in the chamber ahead of us, and about 340 years, and about a grandmother named Isla, who had watched 43 people board a ship and never come back. The morning session was about to begin, and for the first time in a very long time, the truth was not going to be filed in the wrong place. She did not use notes. That was the first thing I noticed when Yael Doss stood at the floor of the council chamber and faced the 41 species of the Galactic Council for the first time in person. She had no data tablet, no prepared document, no written text. She stood with her hands at her sides and looked around the room with the same systematic attention she had used in the neutral docking bay, and then she looked at the session display showing Councillor Draven's name in the position it had occupied for all of the morning's procedural maneuvering, and she began. My name is Yael Doss, she said. I am the commanding officer of the Essen's Unyielding Memory, which is one of 14 Earth Sovereignty Navy vessels currently holding position in the Concordia Transit Corridor. I am the daughter of Lieutenant Commander Aisha Doss, who commanded the recovery operation at the Hegemony Transit Facility called Site 7, which was the first major facility we found and the worst. I am the granddaughter of Isla Doss, who was 15 years old when she watched 43 people board a Theric Hegemony vessel from a colony called Harrow's Point and never come home. I am here representing not just the Earth Sovereignty Navy, but the combined communities of Earth, of every surviving human colony, and of every family that has spent any portion of the last 340 years waiting for someone in a room like this one to hear what happened to us. She paused. The chamber was completely silent. I am not going to spend the time I have been given here telling you about the operation in detail, because the documentation that has been presented to your session record over the last 2 days does that more precisely than I can. I am going to tell you something different. I am going to tell you what it has been like to be a species that the galaxy decided was invisible. She looked around the room. Not at Draven specifically, not at any one face. She looked at all of them. My mother was 9 years old when she understood what had happened to the people who were taken from Harrow's Point and from the other colonies. She understood it the way children understand terrible things, completely, without the filtering that adults develop to make terrible things manageable. She understood that there were people in the galaxy who had looked at her family and decided that they were a resource, She understood that the organization that was supposed to exist to protect species from exactly this kind of thing had been not corrupted, not broken, but simply indifferent. That the protection did not extend to people like her. That the rules of the galaxy, as it was organized, did not apply to her. She was not performing. That was the thing about it that struck me. She was not using the cadences of speech that are designed to move people, the rhythms and techniques that trained speakers use to create emotional effect. She was simply speaking, and the effect was in the content, in the directness of it, in the absence of any protective layer between what she was saying and what it meant. She made a decision. Not at 9 years old. At 9 years old, she just lived with the knowledge. She made the decision later, when she was old enough to act on it. She decided that since the system would not protect her people would have to protect themselves. She spent her life building the capacity for that. She died on the recovery operation at Site 7, which succeeded, but cost her and 11 others their lives. I was 11 when she died. I understood, the way she had at 9, what that meant. Not just about losing her, but about the kind of world we lived in, and what it was going to require of us. Several people in the chamber were very still. Not the stillness of boredom or distance. The stillness of people who are holding something very carefully. I became a naval officer. I rose through the ranks of a fleet that most of this room did not know existed, fighting a conflict that this council has never officially acknowledged, against a hegemony force that has never been officially named as an adversary. I have done this for 23 years. In those 23 years, I have led or participated in 9 major recovery operations. I have brought home people who had been in hegemony facilities for decades. Some of them were 3rd and 4th generation, born in those facilities, who had never seen anything outside of them. I have had to explain to people who had no framework for what a free life looked like, that they were, in fact, free now. She stopped. She let the chamber breathe. I am not standing here to ask for sympathy. I am not standing here to ask for apology, though an honest apology would not be unwelcome. I am standing here because the documents that have been submitted to your session record over the last 2 days constitute proof, clear, verifiable, archive-sourced proof, that crimes were committed against my people, with the knowledge, and in some cases, the active assistance of members of this body. And I am standing here because, as of this morning, a Tharok hegemony fleet element that has been on active operational status for approximately 8 hours is moving toward the outer settlement zones where the highest concentration of human communities now exists. The chamber moved. Not dramatically, but it moved. The kind of collective physical shift that happens when people receive information they were not prepared to receive, when the thing they were following as an abstract political development suddenly resolves into something with weight and urgency and time. Draven said, "Chair Solon." "Counselor Draven," Petra Solon said, and there was something in her voice that had not been there before. A sharpness, a precision, like a door clicking shut. "You will be heard in due course. The floor belongs to Commander Doss." Draven sat back. His expression was perfectly controlled, but I watched his eyes, and what I saw in them was a person rapidly calculating whether there was still a move available to him that changed the outcome, and not finding one that he liked. "I have one thing to ask of this council," Doss said. "One specific, concrete thing, in addition to the 3 demands we transmitted when we arrived. I am asking you to open your military intelligence files on current hegemony fleet positions and share them with the Earth Sovereignty Navy." She looked at the session display. The vote count for the intelligence file motion was showing on a secondary screen, 25 in favor, at the last count, 3 short of the 2/3 threshold. Doss could see the same display. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked back at the room. "I understand that is a significant ask," she said. "Sharing intelligence with a non-member species is not something this body does lightly, and we are not a member species. We may never be a member species. That is a conversation for a different time, if there is a different time." She paused. "What I am telling you is that there are human communities in those outer settlement zones. There are families there. There are children who were born free, some of the first generations to be born free, who have never been inside a hegemony facility and do not know what one looks like. The hegemony fleet that is moving toward them right now is being described, in their own internal communications, as a force being sent to neutralize an irregular threat. The irregular threat they are describing is my people. She looked around the room one more time. I came across the galaxy alone and unarmed to speak to you, she said. My grandmother watched 43 people disappear. My mother died recovering survivors. I have spent 23 years in conflict that no one here officially acknowledges. I am standing in front of you without a weapon or a demand for revenge, or a claim on power that I haven't earned, asking you to share information that could save the lives of people who have already survived everything the hegemony has been able to do to us for 3 centuries. She stopped. I don't know what else I can say to make you see that clearly. I have told you what I know. I have shown you what we found. The rest is your decision. She stepped back from the center of the floor and walked to the side of the chamber, and she stood there, and she waited. The silence lasted approximately 4 seconds. Then Mira Vane stood up. She looked across the chamber, not at Solon, not at Doss, at the 3 species representatives who had been sitting on the fence since the previous day, the maybes who had not committed their votes by morning. She looked at them for a long moment, and she said, very quietly, but clearly enough that the session recording picked it up without difficulty, is there anyone here who genuinely believes this should wait another day? One of the 3 maybes, the representative of a species called the Areth Compact, who was a senior diplomat of about my vintage named Lou Stern, put his hand up, not to speak. In the Areth Compact's tradition, raising the hand during a session was the traditional gesture for indicating a vote change. It was an old custom that most council members had forgotten about. Petra Solon had not forgotten. The record shows Representative Stern indicating a vote change, she said. The intelligence file motion now stands at 26, 2 short of threshold. The second maybe was a younger species, the Veth Republic, represented by a woman named Clara Bond, who had been in council service for only 3 years, and who had been watching the chamber with the careful, absorbing attention of someone who is watching the whole shape of something she will remember for the rest of her career. She stood. The Veth Republic, she said, casts in favor. 27, Solon said, 1 short of threshold. Everyone in the chamber was looking at the same person. The third and final maybe was the Karath Block representative, a man named Philip Ash, who had been on the council for 20 years, and who had a reputation for being unreadable, and for making decisions on the basis of what he privately believed was right, rather than what was politically convenient, which was why he was considered unpredictable. He was looking at Doss, who was standing at the side of the chamber with her hands at her sides and her expression exactly as composed as it had been from the moment she walked in. He was looking at her the way you look at something when you are not sure yet what it means to you, but you are being very honest with yourself in the looking. Then he said, the Karath Block votes in favor. The motion passes, Petra Solon said. 28 in favor. The Council's military intelligence files on current hegemony fleet positions will be transferred to the Earth Sovereignty Navy through the secure diplomatic channel. She said it in the same steady, precise voice she used for everything, but she said it, and it was in the record, and in the archive, and it could not be unfiled. Draven stood up. He did not look angry, which surprised me. He looked, for the first time in my 3 decades of watching him, like someone who has made peace with a particular outcome. Not because he was happy about it, but because he had reached the point where fighting it would cost more than he was willing to spend. Councillor Draven, he said, and his voice was quiet and clear, of the Theric Hegemony delegation, requests to be recognized. Solon looked at him for a moment. Councillor Draven is recognized. He looked at the session display with the 28 votes on it, and then he looked at Doss, and he said, the Theric Hegemony will instruct the fleet element currently in transit to stand down and return to home station. The chamber was very still. Additionally, he said, the Hegemony delegation will be consulting with Hegemony Home Command over the next 24 hours regarding full cooperation with the Council's investigation into the matters raised in this session. He sat down. Owen appeared at my elbow. That was not what I expected, he murmured. The intelligence file motion was the wall, I murmured back. Once it passed, he lost the ability to use the fleet as a deterrent to the session's outcome. The fleet is the only leverage he had. Without it, cooperation is cheaper than resistance. So he pivots, Owen said. He pivots, I said. He's not finished. He will do everything he can to shape the investigation, to limit the scope, to minimize the personal and institutional damage. He is extremely good at that, and he will spend a long time trying to do it. I paused. But the motion passed. The intelligence files are going to Commander Doss. The named complaint is in the official record and cannot be suppressed. The archive is open. I paused again. He can shape some of what comes next. He cannot stop it. Across the chamber, Commander Doss received a message on a small communicator she wore on her wrist. She looked at it. She looked up. For the first time since she had entered the chamber, her expression changed, just slightly. A very small movement at the corners of her mouth and around her eyes, that was not a smile, but was something in the same neighborhood. She looked at me from across the room. I gave her a small nod. She gave me one back. The session went on for another 4 hours after that. There were procedural motions, points of clarification, the formal registration of the intelligence transfer protocol, the filing of Callan Hart's complaint list into permanent session record, the establishment of a formal investigation body under the Council's legal office. Through all of it, Draven participated in a way that was cooperative on the surface and constantly working beneath the surface. And this was expected, and this was manageable, because cooperation, even strategic, self-interested cooperation, is what makes investigation possible. You cannot force truth from closed systems. You can only make the cost of opening them lower than the cost of keeping them shut. By the time the session recessed for the day, several things had happened that had never happened before in the history of the Council. A non-member species had addressed the full Council in person during an active session. The Council's military intelligence files had been shared with an external party. A formal complaint naming 21 individuals, including a sitting councillor, had been entered into permanent session record, and the Tharic hegemony, for the first time in 3 centuries, had ordered a fleet element to stand down in response to external pressure, rather than sending it forward. None of these things were the end of anything. They were the beginning of a very long process that would take years, that would be contested at every stage, that would produce some satisfactory outcomes, and some that fell far short of what justice would actually look like, because justice in a political body is always partial, and always compromised, and always incomplete. But they were real. They were documented. They were, for the first time, in the light. Commander Doss found me in the corridor outside the chamber, as the session ended. She was with her communications officer, and she had her communicator in her hand, and she was transmitting messages to her fleet. She paused when she reached me. "The fleet element is returning to Hegemony Home Station," she said, "confirmed by independent sensor readings from 3 of our ships." "I know," I said. "I saw the message you received." "I also received the intelligence file transfer," she said. "My tactical team is reviewing it. There were 7 additional Hegemony fleet positions we hadn't identified ourselves." She paused. "We will know more in a few hours about whether any of them are positioned in ways we need to be concerned about. And if they are..." She looked at me with those patient, steady eyes. "Then we deal with it," she said, "the same way we have dealt with everything for 40 years. Carefully, deliberately, with as much precision as we can manage, and as little unnecessary cost as possible." I looked at her. "Commander, when you were standing on the floor of that chamber, when you were speaking, were you afraid?" She thought about it. "No," she said. "I was very aware that I was in the right place, and that this was the right moment, and that whatever happened next was what happened next. Fear is for the times when you are not sure whether what you are doing is right. I have been sure about this for a very long time." "Your grandmother would be glad," I said. "I think." She was quiet for a moment. "My grandmother used to say that the worst thing the hegemony did was not what they did to us physically. It was that they tried to make us invisible, to erase us from the official record, from the formal history, from the categories of beings that the galaxy considers worth noticing." She looked at the corridor around us, the high ceilings and the diplomatic banners and the quiet hum of a station that held the machinery of 41 civilizations. "Being visible is not a small thing. Having your name in the record is not a small thing. Today, for the first time in 340 years, the official record of this council contains the truth about what happened to my people. It is incomplete. It will need to be added to. The investigation will take years, but it is there." She paused. "That is not nothing." "No," I said. "It is not nothing." Her communicator chimed. She looked at it. "I need to get back to the ship," she said. "My crew has been at station keeping for over 48 hours, They need a real rest cycle. She pocketed the communicator and looked at me. Will you keep the archive open? The archive is open, I said. Ben Caro made sure of that this morning. The access protocols have been registered with 3 independent certification bodies and the investigation office. No one can close it without a 2/3 council vote and a 30-day public notice period. Then it is open, she said. She turned and walked down the corridor, her communications officer beside her, and I watched her go, and thought about all the things that were now in motion that could not be stopped, and about the particular quality of relief that comes, not when a crisis is over, but when it has been committed to, when the decision has been made, and the first real steps have been taken, and the outcome, however long it takes and however incomplete it is no longer a matter of whether it will happen, but of how. Owen came up beside me. He had a cup of something warm, which he handed me without comment. We stood in the corridor and watched the last of the diplomatic staff filtering out of the chamber, and I thought about Isla Doss watching 43 people board a ship, and about Nina Croft reading a document she was not supposed to read, and about Ben Caro spending 31 years filing documents he was not comfortable filing, and waiting. All of them waiting. What now? Owen said. Now the investigation begins, I said. And that is slow and difficult and mostly not dramatic. That is testimony and document review and legal argumentation and the kind of procedural work that never looks like what people imagine justice looks like. I drank from the cup, and we do all of it. For how long? For as long as it takes, I said, which is what the humans have been doing, except they were doing it alone. I paused. They are not alone anymore. Through the high windows at the end of the corridor, the unyielding memory was visible in the middle distance, still dark against the stars, its scarred hull catching the light the same way it always had. Patient, steady, ready for whatever came after patience. 6 months later, I stood on the surface of a planet I had never expected to visit, and looked at a sky that was the particular shade of blue that human beings apparently find deeply calming, though they struggle to explain exactly why. The planet was Earth. The sky looked like the inside of something hopeful, which was an odd thought for a council diplomat, but diplomacy had been doing odd things to my internal vocabulary since the week the unyielding memory came out of hyperspace above Concordia Station, and the world I had spent 3 centuries navigating began the long, slow, difficult process of becoming a different world. I was Earth's first non-human official ambassador. This was not a title I had sought or expected. It had come about through a process that took 3 months of negotiation and 2 full council votes, and more paperwork than I had generated in any single decade of my prior career, and it had come about because I was the person who had first gone looking in the archive, and because Commander Doss had specifically requested me, and because when Petra Solon had asked me in a private session whether I was willing to take the posting, I had said yes before she had finished asking the question. I had given up my senior council position to do it. This had surprised a number of people. It had not surprised Owen, who had applied immediately to join my staff, and who was already setting up our office in the small building in the human city called Bristol, where the first formal ESN Council diplomatic mission would operate. The investigation that had begun in the Concordia session was still ongoing. It was, as I had predicted to Owen in the corridor outside the chamber, slow and difficult, and mostly not dramatic. It had produced, in its first 6 months, a formal council finding that the Tharic hegemony had violated the Interspecies Compact in matters affecting the population of Earth and its associated colonial settlements. It had produced the suspension of 4 sitting hegemony council representatives pending individual proceedings. It had produced 3 separate legal actions in the council's arbitration body, all of them contested, all of them expected to take years to resolve fully. Draven was still on the council. He had not been named in the session complaint. He had been careful, over his career, to keep his direct involvement sufficiently distant from the documentary record that naming him required evidence that we had not yet been able to certify to the required standard. This was frustrating. It was also, I had come to understand, not unusual. The people most responsible for systems of harm are frequently the hardest to reach through formal process, because they have spent their entire careers ensuring that formal process cannot easily reach them. But the hegemony's operational capacity had been severely constrained by the council investigation and by the very public accounting that had followed the Concordia session. The transit channels through which the human labor operation had run were now under active monitoring by a multi-species oversight body. The pre-contact classification mechanism had been formally suspended pending a complete review. The 21 individuals named in Hartz's complaint list were all currently involved in proceedings of one kind or another. It was not complete. It was not clean. It was not justice in the pure, absolute form that justice exists in the imagination, but rarely in the real world. But it was real. It was documented. It was continuing. And I was on Earth, standing on the grass outside the building, where Owen was setting up our office, looking at a blue sky. A woman came across the grass toward me. She was wearing civilian clothes, the kind of casual outfit that humans seem to default to when not on duty. And she moved with the particular relaxed gait of someone on their home ground. She had short dark hair and 27 pins on a jacket she was wearing over the civilian clothes, because apparently some habits do not disappear when you change out of your uniform. "You're early," said Yael Doss. "I wanted to see the sky before any meetings," I said. She stood beside me and looked up. "Persistent, isn't it?" "The blue? People from other planets always comment on it," she said. "I've had crew members on the ship who had never been to Earth describe the specific color from photographs their parents kept. There's a word for it in about 6 different Earth languages where the word literally just means sky, as if no further description is needed." She paused. "My grandmother kept a photograph of the sky over Harrow's Point. That colony was terraformed from an Earth template. The sky there was the same color." "Did you ever go to Harrow's Point?" I asked. "Once," she said. "After the colony was formally re-established. About 15 years ago. We had recovered enough of the population from the transit facilities and tracked down enough of the descendants in other settlements to restart it. It's a small community now, about 3,000 people. They have a memorial." She was quiet for a moment. "I went to the memorial. I stayed for 2 days. That was enough." We stood in the grass in the blue sky light. Somewhere behind us, I could hear Owen through an open window, managing the installation of communications equipment with the patient. Methodical energy that Owen brought to every practical problem. "How is your crew?" I asked. "Adjusting," she said. "Some of them have been on active combat operations continuously for years. Moving to what we are doing now, investigation support, escort duty for investigation witnesses, liaison work with the council oversight teams. It is different. Some of them find it harder, in certain ways, than the field operations." She glanced at me. "When you are fighting, at least you always know clearly what you are supposed to be doing. Peacetime is more complicated. You have to decide what you are for now, not just what you are against." "And you?" I asked. "What are you for now?" She considered it seriously, the way she considered everything. "I am for this," she said. "Whatever this becomes, the investigation, the oversight work, the slow, complicated, imperfect process of accounting for what happened. I didn't train to be a peacetime diplomat, but I have apparently become one, which my instructors at the Naval Academy would find extremely funny." She paused. "I am also for getting the missing colonies answered. That remains open. The archive has yielded more than we expected. We have located the fates of 3 of the 11 settlements. 2 had survived independently, developing entirely separately from the rest of the human community, and making contact with them has been one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life. 1 was gone, and we have confirmed it. And we have given that confirmation to the families who have been waiting, which was one of the hardest things I have ever done." She stopped. 8 more. We keep looking. We will help you look, I said. The investigation body has authorized full access to the hegemony archival transfers. Ben Caro is leading the document review. She looked at me. Ben Caro is working on the investigation? He retired from his archive position 3 months ago, I said. The following week he applied for a position with the investigation body as a document analysis specialist. He was accepted. He is apparently very good at finding things in places where they should not be. I paused. He says, it is essentially the same job he has always done, except that now the filing direction is reversed. Doss made a sound that was very nearly a laugh. I had heard her make a sound like that only a handful of times in the 6 months I had known her, and each time it caught me slightly off guard. Not because it was unexpected, but because it was so genuine, so completely unguarded, that it felt like being briefly admitted to something private. I want to tell you something, she said, that I probably should have said sooner. Then say it now, I said. When we were planning this, the Concordia approach, the transmission, the whole strategy, we spent a long time assessing which individuals in the council were likely to be responsive and which were likely to be adversarial. She looked at the sky. You were not on either list. You were assessed as a capable but pragmatic diplomat who would follow procedure and manage the situation in whatever way seemed most professionally safe. You were not assessed as a risk-taker. She paused. The assessment was wrong. Assessments often are, I said. What made you go looking in the archive? She asked. I thought about the question. It was a question about a choice I had made in the first few minutes after hearing her transmission, when I had walked away from the observation window and gone to my desk and opened the archive, rather than going to the emergency session. A small choice, in the immediate sense. An ordinary professional instinct. When something doesn't add up, look for the information that explains the discrepancy. But underneath that ordinary instinct was something else. Something I had been aware of for some years, but had never quite articulated to myself clearly. The awareness that the story the council told about itself, the story of 3,000 years of progressive civilization, of careful stewardship, of interspecies cooperation working toward common good, had gaps in it. Gaps I had learned not to look into directly, because looking into them was professionally inconvenient and personally unsettling, and because it was easy to tell yourself that gaps exist in every large system and do not necessarily indicate anything fundamental. When Doss's voice had come through on the general frequency saying 340 years, the gaps had suddenly felt very different. Not like the ordinary imperfections of a large system, but like a specific shape, the shape of something that had been deliberately put there. You said something in your transmission, I told her. You said that council members had committed crimes against your people for 340 years. Not that they had made mistakes, not that there had been failures of oversight. You said crimes. I paused. That word landed in a specific way. I have been a diplomat for 3 centuries. I know the difference between language used to make something sound worse and language that is being used precisely. That word was precise, and I needed to know what was behind it. She nodded slowly. And once you started looking? Once I started looking, I said, I found enough in the first hour to know I was not going to be able to stop. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, my mother used to say that most people are not bad, they are simply comfortable, and comfort makes it very easy not to look at things that might make you uncomfortable. She looked at the city behind us, the buildings and the movement, and the ordinary life of a planet that had carried an extraordinary history, without being permitted to name it openly. The hegemony did not maintain that operation for 3 centuries, because most people in the galaxy are bad. They maintained it because most people were comfortable enough not to look. Yes, I said. I was one of them. You are not one of them now, she said. It was not consolation, exactly. It was something more precise than consolation. An accurate observation about a change of state. No, I said. I am not. Owen appeared at the window and asked, with the pleasant directness that is his signature, whether the ambassador intended to come inside at any point before the first meeting of the day, or whether the ambassador was planning to stand in the garden for the whole morning, because the communications equipment was now fully installed, and several people were waiting. Doss made the near laugh sound again. I like your aide, she said. He is extremely good at his job, and extremely hard to intimidate, I said. He is also, I suspect, the most important person in any room he occupies, though he does not appear to have noticed this. We walked back toward the building. At the door, Doss paused. There is a session next month, she said. The full council, the first one under the new charter provisions, that were agreed in the wake of the investigation findings. I know, I said. I will be there. There will be a formal presentation of the completed human community census, she said. The first complete record of every human settlement, every surviving community, every confirmed population center. The first time in 340 years that the full picture of where we are, and how many of us there are, has been formally acknowledged in front of the council. I looked at her. What does the census show? About 760 million people, she said, across Earth and the established colonies, and the 2 newly contacted independent communities, and the ongoing rehabilitation centers, where people are still in the process of recovery. She paused. 760 million people who were not in anyone's official count, who existed outside the formal record of the galaxy because someone decided it was convenient for them not to exist in it. 760 million. A number so large that the archive's clinical phrase non-registered biological material became, in the face of it, not just inadequate, but obscene. People, families, communities, languages and cultures and children and futures, all of it carried across 3 centuries in the space between the official record and the truth. They will be in the record now, I said. They will be in the record now, she said. And for the first time in all the months I had known her, I heard in her voice something that was not patience, or steadiness, or controlled clarity. Something warmer. Something that had been there all along, beneath all of it, and had not been permitted to surface until now, because there had not been space for it. Because every available part of her had been needed for the long, hard, necessary work of getting to this moment. Relief. Real. Deep. Bone-level relief. The kind that comes not when the fight is over, but when you can finally, for the first time, see clearly that it will end. Not today. Not completely. Not cleanly. But end. Actually end. In a way that means something. She went inside. I stood at the door for a moment. Above me, the blue sky that had no adequate single word for it. I thought about the council chamber that I had spent 3 centuries in, and the new chamber that was going to replace it. Same walls, same marble, same high windows, but different protocols and different requirements, and different accountability structures that had been fought over, and negotiated, and compromised, and were still not perfect, but were something other than what they had been, something that acknowledged, in its architecture, that the peace it existed to maintain was only worth maintaining if it applied to everyone in it. I thought about the word everyone, and what it had taken to get that word correctly applied. I thought about Isla Doss on a colony called Harrow's Point, 15 years old, watching 43 people board a ship. I thought about Ben Caro, filing documents for 31 years and waiting. I thought about Owen, who had come in early with a data chip, and honest eyes on a morning when he did not know that coming in early with honest eyes would set everything else in motion. I thought about Callan Hart, 29 years old, standing in front of the full council, with a list of 21 names, and a voice that did not shake. I thought about Nina Croft, who had read a document she was not supposed to read, and spent 3 years putting it back in the wrong place, and had finally, at the last possible moment, put it in the right one. I thought about what it means for a people to be invisible, not truly invisible, not unseen by everyone, but officially invisible, written out of the records that shape how the galaxy understands itself, how it decides who matters, who deserves protection, who counts. And I thought about the particular quality of light that comes through a window when you have finally, after a very long time, opened it. I went inside. Owen was at the communications terminal, managing 3 things simultaneously, with the calm competence that I had come to rely on the way you rely on North. The office was small, and slightly disorganized, in the productive way of a place that is just beginning to become what it is going to be. The communications equipment was installed and running. On the main display, a message had already arrived from the Council's investigation body with a new document discovery, archive material, from a hegemony regional station captured 8 years ago by an ESN recovery team, processed and translated, and now available for review. The investigation continued. The record expanded. The world was not fixed, and it was not simple, and everything that needed to happen was going to take much longer than felt bearable, and deliver less than justice fully demanded. But it was happening. In the light, in the record, with people who had chosen to look when looking was hard, and to speak when speaking was dangerous, and to carry certain things forward even when the carrying was the whole weight of a very long time. I sat down at my desk. I opened the message from the investigation body. I began to read. Outside, above the city, the sky was exactly the color of a place that had learned, through everything it had been through, to still be capable of something that looked like morning. It was enough. It was, at last, enough.